The arrival of a son, long hoped for, finally graced the Ardell household within the quiet confines of their provincial home. Overwhelmed with joy, his mother and father celebrated their good fortune, with his mother bestowing upon him the unusual name of Ruins. On a particular day, as his father's aide prepared to venture out for provisions, young Ruins unexpectedly intervened, urging the man to avoid the path leading to the southern mountain. Though the man harbored deep skepticism regarding the child's warning, a peculiar instinct compelled him to heed the strange request. That evening brought the man back to the household, drenched from a sudden storm and visibly shaken by an unseen event. Word soon spread that a ferocious attack by wild beasts had taken place on the southern mountain, precisely during the time he would have been there. His survival, it was terrifyingly clear, was a direct result of avoiding that treacherous path. To have gone would have meant certain death. The incident left Ruin's father stunned, forcing him to confront the startling possibility that his son possessed some form of extraordinary perception. As the years passed, this nascent magical aptitude continued to blossom, revealing itself in increasingly undeniable ways. By the age of 10, Ruins had secured a coveted spot at the premier magical academy, an accomplishment that saw him surpass candidates from the most influential noble houses. His prodigious talent earned him the label of a genius, and a brilliant destiny appeared to be an absolute certainty. The unspoken expectation was that he, through his gifts, would elevate his family's humble standing to new heights. However, the very first practical lesson shattered all expectations when an instructor's request for a demonstration revealed Ruin's performance to be shockingly subpar. Further examination uncovered a devastating truth. His physical constitution was fundamentally incompatible with the conventional practice of magic. News of this incongruity spread like wildfire through the academy, transforming the narrative from one of a brilliant prodigy to that of its most dismal failure. His daily existence devolved into a cycle of ridicule and torment, causing his once firm self-assurance to erode with alarming speed. A profound uncertainty took root in his mind, making Ruins question whether any sort of future awaited him. The culmination of his academic journey in his final year hinged upon a single decisive examination. The challenge itself was deceptively simple, a task considered elementary for any other student. Conjure a sphere of fire and strike a designated target with precision. Despite an internal certainty that failure was inevitable, Ruins resolved to make the attempt regardless. In a moment that stunned every onlooker, a massive orb of flame materialized between his palms. The sheer volume of mana he commanded was something no one present could have possibly anticipated. Just as abruptly, however, the flow of mana from one of his hands ceased, causing the projectile to stall and dissipate mid-air. A wave of disappointment washed over the instructor. An inability to manage even this fundamental spell signified an assured failure in the final examinations. The ultimate requirement for the final assessment involved the successful creation of not one, but 10 such spheres of fire. An oppressive combination of immense pressure, the constant derision of his classmates, and their palpable envy weighed heavily upon him. This confluence of negativity pushed him to the brink, where his belief in his own capabilities had all but vanished. Sometime later, a confrontation erupted in a corridor where 2 other students initiated a provocation, directing their taunts toward his family's honor. One of the aggressors, a boy named Ben Folt, venomously branded his father as a man of arrogant inconsequence. While he had managed to maintain his composure during previous slights, this direct assault on his family's dignity was a line he could not allow to be crossed. Losing all restraint, Ruins retaliated with a physical blow against his tormentor. Ben's larger companion immediately moved to intervene on his friend's behalf, intending to strike back. His attempt was cut short, however, as he too was met with a swift, intercepting punch. Enraged, Ben resorted to casting a spell, a clear violation of the Academy's strict prohibition against using magic within its halls. In a flash, a sphere of crackling lightning erupted from his hands, hurtling toward Ruins. An instructor arrived on the scene at that very moment, but it was too late to prevent the bolt of energy from making impact. To all witnesses, it seemed a fatal blow, yet in its aftermath, an utterly unbelievable event transpired. A bizarre sensation overcame Ruins, akin to being submerged deep beneath the surface of the water, plunging into a silent abyss. Before his very eyes, an enigmatic interface, a window displaying his status, materialized out of thin air. He had, in that instant, become an incarnation of a legendary entity known as the Fight, a being fabled as a destroyer of worlds. the vision of a powerful mage manifested beside him, an apparition that Ruins instinctively dismissed as a mere figment of a dream. This illusion proved to be tangible, however, as the mage addressed him directly and proceeded to state his own name. Consciousness returned to the boy, his first sight being that of an attractive young healer who introduced herself as Helen. She informed him that he had been rendered unconscious, yet miraculously, his body bore not a single mark or injury from the attack. His complete lack of harm was astounding, considering he had sustained a direct impact from a potent lightning spell. At that point, Instructor Hadel made his way into the infirmary room. The instructor delivered the news of Ben's expulsion, citing the illegal use of magic and the dissemination of malicious rumors as the cause. Ruins, however, was not to escape discipline entirely. His participation in the altercation earned him a month's assignment to volunteer service. The boy's inexplicable survival naturally piqued the professor's curiosity, leading him to speculate about the involvement of a protective artifact. To clarify, an artifact is understood to be a piece of ancient weaponry, possessing a virtually inexhaustible supply of mana. The notion seemed preposterous, as it was common knowledge that Ruins was the Academy's most inept student, making his possession of such a powerful item highly improbable. Yet the instructor recounted witnessing a crimson aura enveloping Ruins just before Ben's spell made contact, a light that seemingly served as a shield. Once their conversation concluded, the instructor departed, leaving Ruins alone to contemplate the profound implications of what he had learned. In that moment of solitude, the strange status window reappeared before him, a sight so unbelievable he questioned his own senses. His contemplation was interrupted by the entrance of his healer, Helen, who stepped back into the room. Noticing his state, she inquired with genuine concern about what was troubling him, but Ruins found himself at a complete loss for words. He opted for a falsehood, assuring her that nothing was amiss and that he was perfectly fine. Upon his discharge from the infirmary, another new interface manifested itself, this one presenting a list of specific tasks. This list detailed a regimen of rigorous physical exercises that were now required of him. The system indicated that the completion of each prescribed activity would grant him bonuses that enhanced his physical power. As he finished the mandated regimen, he could feel a palpable transformation within his body. His strikes carried greater impact, his movements gained swiftness, and his muscles felt suffused with a newfound force. Additionally, this process unlocked an entirely new skill designated as the Power Circle. Typically, mages cultivate a circle of mana centered around their heart to channel and manifest their magical energies. In Ruin's case, however, his latent mana had vanished, replaced instead by this newly formed circle of raw power. The entire phenomenon was baffling, as the concept of a mage operating with circles of physical power instead of mana was completely unheard of. His development also included the acquisition of a passive skill ominously titled Magician of Madness. A compelling hypothesis began to form, that the legendary entity known as the Fight might have possessed the very same anomaly that now defined him. Subsequently, the system issued a new directive, commanding him once again to attempt the creation of a fireball. After what felt like an eternity of effort, he finally achieved control over his unique strength, leading to the undeniable conclusion that he wielded the power of an artifact. He pushed himself to the point of utter exhaustion, so thoroughly spent that he eventually succumbed to sleep right there on the training grounds. Come morning, a group of his peers discovered Ruin's inert form lying on the practice field. Speculation ran rampant among them, with some assuming he was in a drunken stupor and others morbidly concluding he had passed away. Their debate was cut short when the boy abruptly awoke, leaping to his feet with a start that sent a wave of fright through the onlookers. He offered only curt responses to the ensuing barrage of questions before departing without any further elaboration. Upon making his way back to the dormitory, he crossed paths with an acquaintance named Jason Damon. Jason stood out as the sole student who had consistently treated him with a measure of decency rather than scorn. Being the Academy's foremost ladies' man, Jason's mind immediately jumped to the conclusion that Ruins had spent the night in the company of a young woman. Ruins offered no verbal reply. Instead, he simply tossed his soiled jacket at Jason's face in a gesture of dismissal. While heading toward the bathing facilities, he took a moment to review the tasks assigned by the mysterious system. He was dismayed to find that the required number of repetitions for his exercises had doubled, while the reward for their completion remained unchanged. Fully comprehending the arduous nature of the path ahead, the young man nonetheless steeled his resolve and embraced the challenge. An entire month elapsed under this new, demanding regimen. He dared not miss a single training session, as the thought of negating the progress he had so painstakingly made was unbearable. Eventually, Ruins managed to perform 3,000 repetitions in a single session, pushing his body to what he perceived as its absolute physical threshold. This momentous effort resulted in the unlocking of a new skill, which the system identified as body art. It was a proficiency designed to dramatically augment all of his physical capabilities. His behavior in lectures shifted dramatically. Where he once eagerly participated in academic discourse, he now relegated himself to the quiet anonymity of the back rows. Every spare moment was dedicated to scouring the library's archives, obsessively searching for any mention of the enigmatic entity known as the Fight. Regrettably, his exhaustive research yielded no clues. A similar lack of information plagued his inquiries into the nature of status windows and the other strange phenomena he was experiencing. One day, Jason sought him out, bearing a piece of startling information. The news was that Ruin's own father had come to the academy for a visit. It marked the first such visit in 6 long years, and the sight of his father filled Ruins with a sincere and profound gladness. After their initial greeting, the two withdrew to a private space to speak at length. His father shared news of his younger sister, Rain, who was apparently dedicating herself to the art of swordsmanship. Her motivation, his father explained, was a desire to gain enough strength to protect the brother she perceived as frail. This revelation brought a deep sense of shame to the young man. His father, however, continued, gently suggesting that Ruins might lack the necessary fortitude to continue his studies at the academy. Yet the prospect of surrender was one Ruins adamantly refused to entertain. He countered with a proposition. Should he fail the upcoming final examinations, he would voluntarily withdraw from the institution. Conversely, if he succeeded, he would be permitted to remain and complete his education. These terms were found agreeable by all parties, and with the matter settled, his father departed from the academy grounds. Finally, the day of the momentous examination dawned. As was his custom, Ruins navigated the written portion of the test with flawless precision. The true trial, however, still lay before him. The practical assessment of magical skill. Top honors in this particular category had historically belonged to a highly touted student named Gerishel. This year, however, Mikkel was resolute in his ambition to claim victory across every single one of the trials. In the moments preceding the practical test, Jason observed a newfound and unfamiliar air of confidence about Ruins. It pleased him to learn that his friend had apparently discovered a new method for competition. Their conversation was cut short by the unwelcome intervention of Mikkel himself. Mikkel expressed his loud confusion as to why Ruins would even bother participating, given his well-known disorder affecting the release of magical energy. He smugly advised Ruins to withdraw from the competition immediately to spare himself from certain public humiliation. A fiery resolve, however, burned brightly in the young man's eyes, signaling he had no such intention of backing down. The initial trial required contestants to strike the highest possible number of moving targets within a set time. The challenge was set to an extreme degree of difficulty, and the initial performances from most students were frankly terrible. A mixture of bewilderment and disappointment could be seen on the faces of the observing professors. One instructor, Professor Ellick, who was also Mikkel's uncle, confidently assured his colleagues that his nephew's performance would be worth the wait. True to his uncle's word, Mikkel proceeded to deliver a truly phenomenal result that far outstripped his peers. The consensus among all present was that he had once again easily secured the top position. Naturally, Professor Ellick made no effort to conceal his immense pride in the achievement. This display of smug satisfaction was politely curtailed by the Academy's head, Professor Tyrion, who called for the next participant. Professor Hadel then interjected, suggesting that everyone turn their attention to the performance of Ruins. The moment he stepped into the arena, he immediately began to defy all preconceived notions. Harnessing his unique circles of power, his ability to conjure spells was effectively instantaneous. In that very instant, the system granted him a new passive skill known as time refraction, which vastly accelerated his movement. Moving with the velocity of a typhoon, Ruins struck the targets one after another with an accuracy that was difficult to comprehend. His final tally reached an astonishing 27 hits, establishing a new and absolute record for the Academy. Even Professor Tyrion, the head of the Academy, was compelled to rise from his seat and lead the ensuing applause. As a torrent of congratulations descended upon Ruins, Mikkel watched in stunned disbelief, unable to process how this outcast had managed to so thoroughly outperform everyone. For Ruins, the audible delight of the crowd was more than just praise. It was the validation and recognition for which he had so desperately longed. In the faculty room, meanwhile, a heated debate had erupted among the professors. Professor Ellick could not fathom the mechanism by which Ruins had managed to deploy mana with such impossible speed. He entered into a sharp argument with Professor Hadel on the matter, a dispute that Professor Tyrion was forced to interrupt. The head of the academy stated with finality that what they had witnessed could be described as nothing short of a miracle. While the instructors debated the impossible, the student body continued to buzz with admiration for Ruin's feat. Upon returning to his quarters, he was confronted by Mikkel, who was visibly seething with uncontrollable rage. The rival stepped close in an attempt at intimidation, advising Ruins not to let the single victory go to his head. The threat felt childishly hollow, and when Mikkel took a step forward, Ruins effortlessly braced him, revealing a shocking disparity in their physical strength. In that tense moment, Ruins declared with cold certainty that he would defeat Mikkel in their one-on-one combat trial. Staring into his eyes, Mikkel's bravado seemed to crumble, and he hastily retreated from the room. The subsequent test involved a direct measurement of each student's raw magical power. This evaluation was conducted by the ancient Ogre Kingri, a sentient artifact forged 500 years prior by a legendary archmage. Its function was to absorb a student's mana output and provide an evaluation, much like a punching bag measures the force of a boxer's strike. Kingri, however, was far more than a simple measuring device. He judged the students with a brutal and merciless candor. His acerbic commentary served to humiliate and shatter the confidence of most, sending many a failed examinee away in tears. The order of participants eventually came to Mikkel. He unleashed a powerful emission of mana toward the artifact. Yet even this display was met with scorn, as Kingri dismissed him as insignificant and awarded a meager score of 27 points. The artifact added insult to injury by disparaging his lineage, calling Mikkel's father a blockhead. Finally, the turn came for Ruins to face the artifact. The boy invoked an explosive, mana-devouring spell of the 4th grade. He then channeled the spell's energy into his leg before delivering a tremendously powerful kick against the ogre artifact. Every person in the hall was frozen in place, scarcely believing what they had just witnessed. Kingri stared at Ruins with a stunned expression before suddenly uttering the name of the fight. A wave of confusion passed through the students, as the name held no meaning for any of them. It held meaning for no one, that is, except for Ruins. Kingri began to question him, his voice filled with growing shock and disbelief. The artifact could not seem to accept that an incarnation of the fight existed within the walls of the academy. He initially refused to provide a score, declaring that there were too many prying ears in the vicinity. After some persuasion, however, the artifact relented and assigned Ruins a perfect score of 100 points. A collective gasp of astonishment echoed throughout the academy hall. A short time later, Professor Hadel intercepted Ruins in a quiet corridor. He explained that the head of the academy deemed his 100-point score from Kingri worthy of a special reward. Handing him an official letter, he clarified that Ruins was to proceed immediately to the artifact room. Following the professor's directions, Ruins found himself before the single most restricted door in the entire academy. Professor Hadel permitted him to enter the chamber by himself, choosing to wait outside. The artifact room revealed itself to be a veritable sanctuary of concentrated magical power. Soon, the form of Kingri materialized before him. Here, he was not merely a stationary artifact, but stood fully manifested in his own physical body. The ogre explained that this chamber was the only location where he could assume his true corporeal form. Kingri declared that Ruins possessed a value far beyond his own comprehension. He then began to question him intensely about the player's artifact, asking how he acquired it and what connection he had to the fight. It was then revealed that, in ancient times, Kingri had encountered this legendary figure within his own tribe. This being was an object of both immense respect and profound reverence among his people. The fight was not a human, but belonged instead to the Black Dragon clan of Draconia. Because he was incapable of using traditional magic, he developed the unique Circles of Strength. This innovation ultimately transformed him into the most powerful creature in existence at the time. His insatiable hunger for power, however, eventually led to the utter annihilation of everything around him, including his own being. This conversation with Kingri unlocked a new achievement for Ruins. Find traces of the fight, which came with the title Ogre's Friend. It also bestowed upon him a new skill, the Ogre's Fury. A peculiar stone-like object materialized in his hand. Kingri clarified that this item was a familiar that had always accompanied the fight, and it possessed a notoriously terrible personality. As if on cue, the stone trembled and a small, bear-like creature emerged from within it. This adorable-looking creature, however, was anything but gentle. It immediately attempted to showcase its shape-shifting abilities, but a critical lack of power thwarted its efforts. Finally, after loudly announcing its desire for food, the creature simply fell asleep, demanding to be awoken only when a meal was present. Through these revelations, Ruins began to grasp the true nature of his power and the potential scope of his mission. The young man resolved to protect not only humans but demons as well, and to make his presence known to the entire world. To grow stronger, the aspiring magician commenced an even more intensified training regimen. His new familiar, Kuntara, consumed his power as sustenance, a process that simultaneously accelerated the boy's own development. Thanks to a new passive skill called Kuntara's Companionship, every time the hero's own strength increased, his familiar received a portion of that power. Before being sealed within the stone, Kuntara had possessed 31 stars, a measure indicating immense power. Ruins was eager to amass strength at a much faster rate, a feat that was theoretically possible. The available options included searching for more artifacts, concocting power-enhancing elixirs, or undertaking exceedingly difficult quests. To even attempt such measures, his body required a baseline strength level of at least 1,000 to survive the strain. His current level stood at 930, so he continued to push his physical limits through relentless training. The examination then moved to its most perilous stage, a combat simulation. In this phase, it was tragically common for mages to inadvertently strike their own summoned allies, a fate which befell Jason. He accidentally injured his summoned knights, leading to his immediate disqualification from the trial. After 10 grueling days of competition, only 13 participants remained in contention for the top scores, as each student had been tasked with battling a variety of different monsters. For the most capable students, the designated opponent was an orc, a creature formidable not only for its brutish strength, but also for its cunning intellect. Mikkel initiated the combat as the first challenger, an attempt that culminated in his swift defeat. The creature's onslaught was so ferocious that it brought him to the very brink of death. His life was spared only through the timely intervention of Professor Hadel, who managed to incapacitate the beast with a wood prison enchantment. Filled with a vindictive rage born from humiliation, Mikkel's uncle resolved to sabotage Ruin's opportunity to pass the test. He put forth a motion that Ruins should be pitted against a foe so fearsome that even seasoned adult warriors would hesitate to confront it. Despite the undeniable and extreme danger of such a matchup, the head of the academy ultimately consented to the proposal. Prior to the commencement of the battle, a professor took Ruins aside to inform him of the altered circumstances of his trial. It was common knowledge that an ogre was several magnitudes more powerful than an orc. A single blow from such a creature was capable of shattering a person's skull. The knights assigned to support him were strongly against a close-quarters engagement. He, however, entered the arena by himself, confidently taking a forward position rather than sheltering behind them. His unique brand of magic enabled him to fight effectively at close range, a tactical approach that his allies failed to grasp. At last, the confrontation began. Ruins launched an attack with explosive magic at point-blank range, hurling a fireball directly at the ogre. A thick cloud of smoke enveloped the arena, and every spectator held their breath in suspense. When the dust finally settled, Ruins was revealed to be standing completely unscathed. After exchanging a few brief words with his knightly escort, he charged back into the fray, preventing them from interfering. His strategy revolved around patiently probing for a vulnerability in his opponent's defenses. At that moment, the system issued an emergency quest: defeat the opponent on the spot by landing a direct blow with his fist. Ruins focused his mana, activated his time refraction skill, and struck a precise point on the creature. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the arena as the massive ogre collapsed to the ground. An eruption of cheers and shouts came from the astonished crowd. No one among them could fathom that such a feat was even possible. Even the knights began to bombard Ruins with questions about his methods. Unsurprisingly, the young man had successfully cleared this stage of the examination. Following the battle, the victor was rewarded with the unexpected unlocking of a mini-map ability. Kuntara, his familiar, explained that this new skill would allow him to perceive everything within a 500-meter radius. It would also grant him the ability to view the status window of any target he chose. Intrigued by this development, Ruins tested the new feature by inspecting his familiar. He then attempted to view the personal data of Professor Hadel. This attempt, however, yielded no information about the instructor. He soon learned that if an individual's power level exceeded his own, their characteristics would remain concealed from him. In the aftermath of the third stage, the entire academy was abuzz with talk of the boy's accomplishments. It was not long before an attractive girl approached him and offered him a portion of her dinner. He felt indifferent to the gesture and passed his share along to Jason. During their subsequent conversation, Ruins utilized his player's eye's ability to assess Jason's capabilities. He discovered that his friend's latent potential was astonishingly high, rivaled only by what he had seen in Mikkel. He immediately encouraged Jason to train with greater intensity, assuring him that he was capable of achieving incredible results. Meanwhile, the academy was filled with active discussion about the upcoming Great Festival, one of the most significant events of the year. This event was a combination of a magic festival, which determined the best overall student, and an Olympic-style tournament for the title of the strongest magician. An impressive monetary prize, along with numerous other accolades, awaited the victors. Participation, however, was highly selective and not open to everyone. Each academy was permitted to select only a single main representative and a supporting team of 30 members. Naturally, speculation was rampant as to who would be chosen as the primary participant this year. The majority of wagers were placed on Ruins as the likely candidate. This was a notable shift, as in previous years the academy had always been represented by Mikkel. His consistent failures had led to the Ignite Academy earning the unfortunate nickname of a bottom-tier academy. They had repeatedly finished in last place in the competition. Ruins, however, was solely focused on the fourth and final stage of his exam. The challenge was a one-on-one duel against his rival, Mikkel. 4 days after the conclusion of the third stage, Ruins' strength attribute finally reached 1,000 points. He also unlocked a new achievement for completing 5,000 repetitions in his training tasks. As a result of this milestone, a massive aura of flame erupted around his familiar Kuntara. The familiar advanced to its second rank, granting Ruins an additional 200 points of strength. A new training mode was now unlocked, allowing for practice in a realistic combat scenario. Kuntara demonstrated its new capabilities by transforming into a sparring golem called a Pugello. This transformation was intended to aid Ruins in his preparation and training. Kuntara then shapeshifted into the form of a third-grade magician for further practice. This allowed Ruins to practice his techniques at full force without causing harm to his assistant or himself. In stark contrast, Mikkel and his uncle eschewed proper training in favor of devising a scheme to cheat their way past Ruins. The professor urged Mikkel to consume a potion made from a flaming flower, which drastically reduces the casting time for mana. To mask the use of this forbidden substance, he was provided with a secondary potion. The fourth exam, a series of one-on-one duels, finally commenced. The audience was filled with anticipation for the fight between Ruins and Mikkel. As the two opponents stepped into the arena, however, Ruins immediately sensed that something was wrong. A quick scan with his player's eyes revealed a hidden berserk status affecting his rival. The pre-match inspection for prohibited substances was conducted by Professor Ellick, who, unsurprisingly, cleared his nephew Mikkel. When the battle began, the spectators gasped in astonishment. Mikkel unleashed his mana at an unbelievable rate, launching a barrage of spells and streams of fiery breath. He attempted to encircle Ruins with attacks, but his opponent, using his acceleration skill, evaded them with ease. Drawing upon his knowledge, the boy deduced that his adversary had indeed consumed the flaming flower potion, which meant he was unable to feel pain. He consequently adjusted his strategy and activated his time refraction skill. Ruins quickly gained the upper hand, finishing the fight with a powerful slap followed by a decisive blow. Since Mikkel could not feel pain, Ruins feared killing him accidentally and instead cast a snapping tree spell on a nearby object. As proof of his accusation, he demonstrated the same slap he had used on his opponent against a tree. The force of the slap was so immense that it snapped the tree clean in half. This act served as undeniable confirmation that Mikkel's lack of reaction was due to him not feeling any pain. Professor Tyrion was absolutely furious and summoned Professor Ellick to face a tribunal. Rumors began to circulate about the potential expulsion of the entire Gerishel family, while everyone else congratulated Ruins on his victory. Shortly thereafter, the winner of the duel was summoned to the office of the head of the academy. Upon opening the door, however, he was met with a surprising sight. The room before him was not part of the Ignite Academy, but an illusion of the Ardell family's territory. In the center of the illusory space stood the throne of the King of Magicians. Ruins was completely baffled by what was happening until the professor appeared beside him and provided an explanation. The vision was an illusion created by the Eye of Malice, a demonic artifact that forces a person to perceive their deepest desires. Thus, the throne of the King of Magicians represented what Ruins himself subconsciously coveted most. Glancing at another illusory door, the boy saw visions of public recognition and his own victory. Once inside the actual office, Professor Tyrion asked Ruins how he had known that Mikkel had used the flaming flower potion. Ruins explained that his opponent's behavior was uncharacteristically aggressive, but he carefully avoided revealing his player's eyes ability. His keen powers of observation left the professor deeply impressed. Tyrion then officially announced that the Gerishel family had been expelled from the academy. Following this news, the head of the academy formally invited Ruins to represent them at the Great Festival. Ruins was taken aback by the offer, even though he was objectively the academy's top student. He expressed his gratitude for the honor, but confessed that he lacked confidence in his ability to succeed. In response, Tyrion firmly assured him otherwise, adding that Ruins would serve as the academy's secret weapon. At that moment, the leader of the Fuldan Territory's knightly order, Gulter, entered the office. Ruins was greatly surprised, as this particular knight was renowned as one of the very best. Joining the conversation, Gulter invited the young man to study the art of the body to make his fighting style less predictable. Although Ruins' magic was powerful, his physical movements were repetitive and lacked variation. This predictability meant that a skilled and experienced adversary could easily read his intentions. Consequently, Gulter became his personal instructor. Their training started with the fundamentals of proper posture and stance, before progressing to the study of heavenly martial arts, a discipline comprising 36 techniques. The student was initially puzzled as to why such a renowned knight would personally instruct him. Gulter explained that he viewed it as an investment in the future, as he recognized the young man's immense potential. After just 3 weeks of intensive training, Ruins had made remarkable progress. His familiar Kuntara noted that the fight had taken an entire year to reach 2,000 strength points, whereas Ruins had amassed 2,130 points in a fraction of that time. While Ruins was conversing with his familiar, Jason ran up to them with news that the final list of festival participants was ready. The boy felt a surge of the same excitement he had experienced 6 years prior upon his admission to the academy. Approaching the notice board, he saw his own name listed among the primary representatives. As it turned out, Jason had been selected as the 31st member, placing him on the team for group competitions. In the following moments, Ruins was congratulated by everyone, including Professor Hadel. The teacher expressed his astonishment that the young man had not only mastered heavenly martial arts, but had also reached the 5th rank by the age of 16. After completing the remaining preparations, Ruins and his team were scheduled to travel to Altine aboard a mana train. This mode of transportation was a form of incredibly fast magical transit. While he was discussing the travel details with Jason, they were accosted by Henkas, one of Michael's former cronies. He was accompanied by a group of like-minded students who openly doubted the strength of their new representative. They began to argue, insisting that Mikkel was the stronger magician, but Ruins swiftly put them in their place. He made it clear that while he had no desire for animosity, their continued disrespect would not lead to a positive outcome. All of the festival participants eventually settled into their designated spots on the magical transport. The period of calm, however, proved to be short-lived. A group of representatives from the O2 Institute soon appeared in their train car. These students had not come for a friendly visit. Their clear intention was to humiliate the representatives from the Ignite Academy, especially targeting anyone associated with the Gerishels. The O2 Institute was the sole educational establishment in the Sandy Kingdom and was famous for producing outstanding magicians. From their perspective, Ignite was a weak and insignificant rival, and they made no effort to hide their contempt. Now, however, the main representative of Ignite was Ruins. When the students from O2 finally took notice of Ruins, their surprise was palpable. Their leader, a young man named Seth Malkiri, stepped forward to confront him. The boy attempted a condescending introduction, but Ruins cut him off sharply, communicating that he would not tolerate their antics. His demand for an apology angered his rival, who looked ready to escalate the confrontation into a physical fight. Just then, Professor Oit from their institute entered the car, ordering the students back to their seats. The professor and Seth then began to discuss the new representative from Ignite. The instructor emphasized that Ruins exuded confidence and seemed nothing like the Gerishels of the past. It was now time, however, to focus on the upcoming trials of the festival. Back in the Ignite wagon, a full-blown discussion of the first stage, a group battle, was underway. Given that Ignite's team was generally considered weaker than the others, their chances of success seemed slim. Yet, after witnessing Ruins stand up to their bullies, the students began to feel a renewed sense of unity. He had demonstrated how to respond with dignity to those who disrespect their rivals, a display that significantly boosted the team's morale. While the team was engrossed in strategizing, the train arrived almost unnoticed at the Duchy of Altine, the festival's host location. This duchy was, incidentally, a neutral territory where bloodshed was strictly forbidden, which was precisely why all major competitions were held there. Upon their arrival, the participants immediately caught sight of the representatives from the Rhinic Imperial Federation, who were a dazzling display of wealth and beautiful women. Following a brief period of rest, a carriage transported them to their designated living quarters. During the journey, Kuntara detected a familiar, strange scent in the air. It was certain that a relic belonging to the fight was located somewhere in this place. The following day, Ruins and Kuntara set out to find the source of the scent, guided by the minimap. Their search led them to a dusty, memory-filled workshop. Using his player's eye ability, Ruins discovered a ring of invulnerability hidden among the wares. Kuntara instantly recognized the artifact, explaining that it was the first failed experiment of the fight. Its power was uncontrollable, capable of activating randomly during a battle or even on nearby allies. Regardless of the risk, Ruins decided to purchase it, and his strength immediately surged by 200 points. To his great surprise, the shopkeeper ended up giving him the ring for free. It had been collecting dust for far too long, as no one besides the fight had ever been able to utilize the circles of power. As a gesture of gratitude, Ruins decided to purchase something else from the shop. Activating his player's eye once more, he scanned a collection of books and located a rare volume on the quantum mechanics of magic and swordplay. Just as he reached for it, another festival participant, Irene Prius, laid claim to the same artifact. She was a student at the Siki Women's University and ranked third in potential among the magicians of her generation. Even King Tarian Artemis, notoriously known as the Dirty King, had included her on his list of the 11 most promising magicians of the future. Irene was already a formidable magician of the 5th rank. Noticing Ruins' academy uniform, she guessed he was from Ignite and politely asked him to concede the book, explaining that she had come specifically for it. Ruins inquired as to her reasons, but she remained silent on the matter. In the end, he decided to relent and let her have the book. Upon his return, he was immediately mobbed by his teammates, who were envious of his encounter with the famous Irene. Jason, who had long dreamed of meeting her, eagerly asked what they had talked about. One of the other students present mentioned that Irene was known for always taking second place, consistently losing to a rival named Duma Prime. Duma was the wielder of a legendary shining sword. Only then did Ruins understand why she had been so desperate to obtain that particular book. Becoming a magical swordsman is not an easy path, as training in this hybrid discipline is exceptionally difficult, and reaching the pinnacle is even more so. Duma was considered unique because he possessed an S-class artifact and could fight on par with mid-level knights. As they were talking, an announcement declared the opening matches of the festival. Ignite's first opponent was scheduled to be the O2 Institute. Their representatives immediately began their boastful taunts, assuring everyone that victory was already in their pocket. Ruins, however, chose this moment to introduce himself to the wider audience, calmly stating that Ignite would no longer be the bottom-tier academy everyone called it. The head representative from O2 mockingly asked who he thought he was to make such a bold claim. With pride, Ruins announced that he was his academy's secret weapon. His opponents grew wary at this declaration and attempted to gather more information about him. They discovered that while he had previously ranked last, he had shown incredible and unexpected results during his graduation year. The Ignite team gathered to develop a strategy for the next day's competition. The event consisted of group battles where participants had to throw mana grenades at opposing teams' golems. Ruins proposed a non-standard tactical formation. One group would charge the mana grenades, a second would be responsible for delivering them, a third would attack the golem directly, and a fourth would target the enemy's goal. Many of his teammates expressed doubts about this complex strategy. Ruins, however, used his player's eye to assign each student to a role that perfectly matched their abilities. Suddenly, a badly beaten student from their team ran into the Ignite camp, claiming that the members of O2 were responsible. An enraged Ruins marched directly to their leader, Seth Malkiri. He grabbed the boy by the shoulder and, with little effort, forced him to his knees. Seth flew into a rage and lunged to attack, but Ruins easily intercepted his advance. He then proposed a wager on the outcome of their match. The loser would have to endure a public slap from the winner. This development added even more motivation for his team, as everyone wanted to witness Ruins punish the insolent bully. At last, it was time to enter the arena for their match. Just before the start, Ruins caught sight of Irene in the crowd. Having heard about his conflict with the O2 team, she decided to offer him a piece of advice, suggesting that he not reveal his true power all at once. With that, the competition officially began. Almost everyone in the audience was certain that Ignat's unconventional tactics were doomed to fail. Irene, however, noticed that each participant had been assigned a role that was perfectly suited to their individual strengths. This level of strategic insight surprised her greatly. Soon, the right arm of the Ignat team's golem was destroyed. The students from O2 could already sense their impending defeat. At the critical moment, Jason delivered the decisive final blow. Victory for the Ignat Academy was officially declared. After their win, everyone was struck by the realization that they were no longer a bottom-tier academy. There was little time to celebrate, however, as a new test awaited them just ahead. The subsequent task, designed for the main representatives, was a Capture the Flag-style event, and the match was set to be between Ruins and Seth Malkiri. As he stepped into the arena, Ruins' mind was occupied with matters extending far beyond the immediate conflict. His thoughts were consumed with the ambition to transcend his past failures and finally shed the label of being last. Above all other considerations, he yearned for an opportunity to demonstrate his true worth to the King of Magicians. Seated among the adjudicators was the imposing figure of the formidable King Terran himself. The monarch's gaze fell upon Ruins, and a distinct look of interest crossed his features. There was a time when the king had dismissed the young man as a disappointment upon learning of his unusual mana-release affliction. Observing him now in the heat of competition, however, that initial disappointment had transformed into a fervent curiosity. At last, the signal was given and the duel commenced. With blinding velocity, Seth charged directly toward Ruins. He attempted to summon a combat familiar to his aid, but his opponent's reaction speed was far superior. By activating his time refraction skill, Ruins successfully intercepted Malkiri's offensive. He went a step further, skillfully redirecting the force of his adversary's own attack back toward its originator. Just as the battle's conclusion appeared certain, Ruins abruptly halted his counterattack just before it made contact. This act of mercy, effectively sparing his opponent from defeat, sent a ripple of astonishment through the crowd. Recalling the terms of their wager, however, Ruins followed through and delivered the promised slap across his face. The force of the blow sent his opponent careening backward, much in the same manner as Mikkel had before him. For a brief second, the entire arena was suspended in stunned silence before erupting into thunderous applause. Even the great King Terran seemed momentarily paralyzed by the display. Despite being a man who had reached the power level of a demigod, he had never witnessed such a form of magic. An intense curiosity grew within him regarding the true identity of this boy. The king intended to question the head of the Ignat Academy, but the professor respectfully declined to disclose any information. In response, the formidable king declared that he would summon Ruins for a personal audience himself. The head of the academy, however, issued a reminder that all magicians possess the right to maintain secrecy regarding their techniques. To honor their victories in both the group and individual competitions, Ruins' team organized a celebratory evening. As a special treat, Jason presented Ruins with a local cocktail made from coconut and vanilla. This particular drink, known as the Dragon's Kiss, was reputed to amplify one's emotions. In the middle of the festivities, Seth Malkiri made an unexpected appearance. Jason immediately became tense, assuming that his rival had arrived with hostile intentions. Seth, however, had no intention of causing a disruption. He had come to offer a sincere apology for his past behavior, acknowledging his mistakes and realizing the wrong in humiliating others. Just as he was about to depart, Seth received an unforeseen invitation. In a show of magnanimity, Ruins invited him to join them at their table. Ultimately, their revelry became so boisterous that it evolved into a full-blown drinking party. The following morning, Ruins found himself the subject of gentle mockery from his teammates. The potent drink had made him uncharacteristically emotional the night before. He felt a slight twinge of embarrassment, which intensified when he ran into Seth in the corridor. It seemed that Seth now regarded him as his closest friend, a development that felt rather peculiar. Their awkward exchange was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Professor Hadel in the hallway. He informed Ruins that the formidable king wished to see him for a private meeting. The instructor cautioned him that the audience was likely to be a challenging one. Ruins relayed this news to his team, leaving them all in a state of amazement. Before that, however, another team-based test awaited them. The event was Arrowball, a game that required teams to throw a magical arrow through a goal. Victory in this game demanded a combination of magical prowess and clever strategy. The team decided that ruins would serve as a decoy, drawing the full attention of their opponents. This would, in turn, allow his allies to concentrate on landing a precise shot. Everyone was in agreement with this strategic approach, and soon the match was underway. Ruins charged ahead, immediately becoming the focal point for the opposing team. They unleashed a barrage of spells in an attempt to halt his advance, but all their efforts were in vain. Even his former rival Seth could be heard cheering for him enthusiastically from the stands. Ruins demonstrated an incredible command of close-quarters combat, effectively shouldering the entire offensive burden himself. His teammates did not hesitate, skillfully capitalizing on the opportunity he had created. The players from Ignite acted with perfect coordination, exploiting their enemies' weaknesses and showcasing a superior class of play. The final result was a staggering 11-0 victory. Their opponents were so thoroughly demoralized that they conceded the match before the final whistle had even blown. It was a complete and unconditional triumph for the team from Ignite. After the conclusion of the match, Ruins was met by Professor Hadel. The instructor informed him that his meeting with King Terran was scheduled for that evening, and he would be accompanied by the head of the academy. When the time for the dinner meeting arrived, Ruins made his way to the designated location. His familiar Kuntara immediately sensed an ominous mana permeating the area, a feeling that was deeply unsettling. The moment Ruins took his seat, the king began to speak, implying that he had been observing him for a long time and knew exactly who he was. Without any preamble, Terran started questioning how the boy had managed to achieve such a high level of power in so little time. The young man, of course, had no intention of revealing his secrets, stating only that his success was due to zealous training. The king pressed further, asking for specifics about the efforts he had undertaken. Ruins spoke about his recent studies in the art of the body, but it was obvious to all that he was withholding something significant. Terran eventually understood that he would not be able to extract any more information and simply declared that he would be watching him very closely from now on. To Ruins, this declaration felt less like a threat and more like a motivating challenge. It was, in a sense, a gauntlet being thrown down. The next morning, Professors Tyrion and Terran were once again discussing the previous night's dinner. The so-called Dirty King was clearly impressed by the young man. He remarked that Ruins was not merely a bold youth, but the most stubborn and impudent individual he had ever encountered. Any other student would have long since groveled before him. Yet this boy not only showed no fear, but audaciously held his own as an equal. In another part of the festival grounds, Duma Prime was having a very different kind of conversation. A member of his team rushed to him with the news that King Terran had taken a personal interest in Ruins. This information came as a profound shock to him. He had always viewed himself as the best, the only one truly deserving of the attention of such an important figure. And now, some upstart from Ignite was diverting his mentor's focus? In a fit of rage, he stormed down the corridor, trying to process how this could have happened. His anger reached a boiling point, and he marched directly toward Ruins to confront him. Without attempting to hide his irritation, Duma sharply demanded to know what he had discussed with the Dirty King. Ruins, however, only offered a calm look and replied with a smirk that he had no intention of sharing the details with him. This response clearly did not satisfy Duma. The tension in the air escalated, and at one point, Duma's hand even moved to the hilt of his sword, as if he were prepared to initiate a duel right then and there. Ruins, for his part, did not back down, bracing himself for combat as he recognized that a confrontation might be unavoidable. It seemed as though another second would see their blades cross, but the situation was diffused by the unexpected intervention of Irina Prius. Her timely arrival turned the tense standoff into something resembling a joke, and Duma, after casting one last resentful glance, simply turned and left. Ruins then asked Irene if Duma always behaved in such a volatile manner. The girl smiled and explained that Duma was usually a man of very few words, but this situation was a special case. He was furious that Ruins had managed to capture the attention of the formidable king. Private audiences with the monarch were an extreme rarity, which meant that Ruins had proven himself to be a worthy rival in the king's eyes. Irene then asked with a curious expression if he had genuinely been prepared to fight Duma. Ruins admitted that he was not, as he had no desire to be disqualified, and added that Duma was likely just attempting to intimidate him. The girl chuckled at his response, called him strange, and then took her leave. Another group battle took place shortly after, but this time Ignite was unfortunately unable to secure a victory. The team was disheartened by the loss, but Ruins offered reassurance while his own thoughts turned toward the upcoming individual competitions. The next trial proved to be an even greater challenge than the last. It was to be an individual battle royale for survival. All 32 main representatives from each school would be deployed onto an island where they would be forced to fight one another. The ultimate victor would be awarded 32 points, while the first to be eliminated would receive only 1. Defeated participants would be instantly teleported back, and the island itself was designed to become progressively more dangerous over time. A test of this nature had the potential to dramatically alter the overall rankings, and everyone knew it would identify the true leaders of the competition. Jason advised him to begin his preparations immediately, noting that all the other participants were already starting to form alliances. Ruins pondered who he should attempt to team up with. The name Irene came to mind, but he had no certainty that she would agree to an alliance. Suddenly, Seth ran up to him and eagerly proposed that they join forces. Ruins realized he had completely forgotten about his new friend and quickly accepted the offer. The two of them then went together to extend an invitation to Irene to join their team. They were told by others, however, that the girl had already refused every offer she had received. When they approached her, the girl simply smiled and said that Ruins was the one she had been waiting for. Her statement was rather unexpected and even carried a slight hint of romantic overtone. The newly formed trio began to discuss their strategy, as they knew their most dangerous opposition would be a detachment of 14 people led by Dalian Mulkin. This particular magician was a known genius who consistently ranked among the top 5 participants and specialized in holy magic. Ruins, however, found himself more concerned with the prospect of facing Duma. It was a duel with him that he felt could ultimately be the deciding factor in the competition. Once the participants were deployed onto the island, it became immediately apparent that survival here would not be easy. The various groups scattered to secure their positions, and a massive barrier materialized above the island, which began to shrink gradually. The barrier was not yet an immediate threat, but time was limited, and claiming the best territory was crucial. After a long period of travel, Seth began to complain of hunger. At that particular moment, however, there was no time to think about food. In the distance, the sound of explosions suddenly echoed through the air. The battles for supremacy had already begun. Soon enough, their small group encountered another alliance. Seth immediately caught the scent of food from their camp and was the first to charge into an attack. Irene quickly moved to support him. Their opponents attempted to form a defensive blockade against the assault. Although the enemies were strong, Ruins proved to be incredibly swift. He deftly evaded all of their attacks before unleashing a decisive blow with his explosive mana. The brief skirmish ended decisively in his favor. After dealing with their adversaries, the trio inspected the captured supplies and were pleasantly surprised. There was enough food to sustain them for several days, which meant hunger was no longer an immediate threat and boosted the team's confidence. All at once, another massive explosion resounded from somewhere in the distance. The immediate assumption from everyone was that this was the work of the large 14-person alliance. Irene, however, voiced a different theory. She was convinced that Duma Prime was the one responsible for the distant chaos. They decided to locate a defensible position and soon stumbled upon a small house that could serve as a temporary shelter. Seth's first impulse was to cook a steak, but he was sharply stopped by his companions. If they were to light a fire, the aroma of cooking meat would instantly reveal their location, making another battle inevitable. The other members of the group began to notice that Ruins seemed to have an uncanny ability to predict the course of events. He would foresee things that later came to pass, which started to raise questions among his allies. Ruins explained that the situation was much simpler than it appeared, as one could predict people's movements by analyzing the map. The central settlement on the island was the only location capable of housing a large number of participants. It was to that location that both Dalian's group and Duma Prime would most likely travel. This was the most logical course of action, and if his assumption proved correct, it meant a major confrontation was imminent. Irene, however, did not believe that Duma Prime would head toward the central settlement. It seemed illogical to her, as a single person marching into a crowd of magicians was tantamount to suicide. Ruins, however, held a different perspective, arguing it was the best way to hunt alone and accumulate points by eliminating opponents. This aggressive style, he contended, was perfectly in line with Duma's character. Furthermore, he suggested that Prime was not acting without reason. His true objective, most likely, was to capture the undivided attention of the formidable king. After their discussion, the team decided it was best to establish a rotating watch. Irene volunteered to take the first shift monitoring the camp. As her watch ended late into the night, She woke Ruins with urgent news. An enemy had managed to infiltrate their territory. They concealed themselves to avoid revealing their presence and watched as the stranger cautiously approached the house. The moment the intruder crossed the threshold, Ruins moved with blinding speed and immobilized him. The captured individual turned out to be Callus, a representative from the Academy column. He was terrified and immediately began to plead for his life. When questioned about whether he had any allies, he vehemently denied it. Seth then pressed him, stating that he remembered seeing him with 6 allies earlier. The prisoner's voice trembled, however, when he uttered one particular name: Duma Prime. The boy began to recount how his group had initially felt confident in their numbers. Then out of nowhere, Duma had appeared. He attacked them first, instigating chaos, which in turn attracted the attention of Dalian Malkin's group, who were nearby. Only 2 members of his group had survived the ensuing melee, Column and his partner. Just as they were attempting to escape, however, Duma had materialized before them once again. After a brief confrontation, he vanished back into the bushes, seemingly hiding in wait for a final strike. Ruins was impressed by the strategic brilliance of his rival's tactics, recognizing how he skillfully manipulated opponents against each other to achieve maximum results with minimal effort. Column, realizing he stood no chance of surviving alone, pleaded to be allowed to join their alliance. Irene and Seth exchanged uncertain glances, considering the proposition, but Ruins refused without a moment's hesitation. They were surprised by his immediate decisiveness, but Ruins harbored a deep suspicion. He posed a single question to Column: how had he managed to escape from Duma? The prisoner was unable to provide a clear answer. This was an impossibility. Duma was not the type to leave survivors. This meant that either the boy was lying or something far more sinister was at play. Ruins activated his player's eye, but the scan revealed nothing unusual about the prisoner. This lack of information pointed to only one conclusion: a magically crafted puppet stood before them. Without wasting another second, Ruins destroyed the puppet with a single lightning-fast strike. The discovery meant that they needed to abandon their current location immediately. A short time later, as the sky began to brighten, they resumed their journey. While on the move, they analyzed the recent events, trying to deduce who had sent the puppet after them. There were many potential suspects, but one individual stood out among the rest. Koherki, the top student from the Magic College, was a known specialist in the creation of magical puppets and potions. Most importantly, he was a confirmed member of Dalian Malkin's large alliance. This realization meant that it was only a matter of time before all the other teams began actively hunting their small trio. Recalling the shrinking barrier, they calculated that the western portion of the island would soon become an inaccessible death trap. It was at this moment that Irene remembered an old proverb: one should use a pirate to fight other pirates. A new plan began to form in their minds. Meanwhile, within the largest alliance, the topic of discussion was Ruins' team. They had been certain that their trap had nearly succeeded, but at the last moment, their prey had slipped away. Their objective was now crystal clear. They would capture the trio no matter the cost. No one in the group was certain, however, that the trio would head toward the western base. Deciding to investigate, they moved west and soon detected a powerful emission of mana. Their immediate thought was that this must be Ruins and his team engaged in a fight, which presented an opportunity to swoop in and claim easy points. As they drew closer, however, they realized they had walked directly into an ambush. By then, it was already too late to retreat. Ruins, Irene, and Seth, who had been hiding in the high branches of the trees, observed the chaos unfolding below. Soon, they decided it was time to join the battle themselves to earn more points. Dalian's team suddenly joined the fray on their side, and for a short time, they became part of a larger temporary alliance. With only 3 members, a temporary union with a stronger force was the most logical step. But then Duma Prime himself appeared. To the utter astonishment of everyone present, he also began to act in concert with them. It appeared as though he was merely biding his time, waiting for the opportune moment to eliminate the lesser threats before turning his attention to his primary adversary. A collective understanding spread among the remaining contestants that confronting the strongest participant was an act of pure madness. Nevertheless, rather than scattering, they resolved to unite and offer resistance. By combining his time refraction ability with a powerful earthquake spell, Ruins managed to successfully dispatch several of the other opponents. Amid the chaotic melee, Duma finally came face to face with Ruins and, with a confident grin, vowed to deal with him personally at a later time. Having delivered this promise, he promptly withdrew from the immediate vicinity. Simultaneously, within the organizers' chambers, the official rosters of the finalists were beginning to take shape. While most of the results unfolded as anticipated, a few unexpected names on the list still managed to cause a stir. King Terran recalled how Ruins had vowed to prove he was better than all the other students the king had personally selected. Now, the monarch found himself genuinely invested in observing the boy, eager to discover if he could truly defeat the formidable Duma. Having decided to take a rest, the trio made a stop at Base B, which was situated near the central island. During this brief respite, Ruins successfully managed to complete one of the pending tasks from his system. Irene eventually awoke from her rest, and Seth busied himself with preparing a meal. The cooked meat proved to be so delicious that for a moment they forgot about all their other concerns. While sharing the meal, the trio began to discuss what the future might hold for them. None of them, however, could truly know what destiny had in store. Irene confessed that she still had one unfulfilled ambition: to finally defeat Duma Prime. For her, this long-standing rivalry felt like a piece of unfinished homework that needed to be completed. As evening approached, the barrier continued its inexorable contraction. This progression meant that remaining in their current location was no longer a viable option. Their only logical destination was the central base where the main village was located. It was highly probable, however, that Dalian and his ally Shoshiri were already positioned there. There was no absolute certainty that Duma would also be there. He had, however, attracted an enormous amount of attention, and it was clear that each of his movements now carried strategic weight. The situation had become critical, where even advancing a single rank could yield a huge number of points. Any misstep at this stage could cost someone the entire competition. Their objective became clear. They needed to locate Duma Prime. By utilizing his unique abilities, Ruins was able to pinpoint his rival's precise location. Instead of engaging in battle himself, however, he simply guided his allies toward their enemy. Ruins remembered Irene's personal goal and offered her the opportunity to fight Duma Prime. Duma responded only with a derisive and mocking smirk. He declared that she was far too insignificant to be considered a worthy opponent for him. In his estimation, she posed absolutely no real threat. Irene, however, was filled with a steely determination. Even if her chances were slim, she had no intention of backing down. The girl initiated the attack, unleashing a powerful blizzard spell, but Duma neutralized it with ease. In the next instant, he drew his sword, and she knew she would not have enough time to evade the coming strike. At the very last second, Ruins intervened to save her. He had promised to stay out of the fight, but he could not stand by and allow his comrade to be eliminated from the game. The nature of the battle now shifted to a one-on-one duel. Ruins had already observed Irene's mistakes and drawn his own conclusions. He recalled being taught that in a fight against a master swordsman, one must watch their feet, as that is where the power of their strikes originates. With this knowledge, he entered the fray, but Duma's speed was still overwhelming. Soon, his rival outmaneuvered him and managed to inflict a deep wound. Prime smirked and commented that Ruins was perceiving the battle incorrectly. This taunt, however, only served to further galvanize Ruins. His usual strategy involved attacking the moment an opponent was unprepared. Duma's legendary sword, however, gave him too great of an advantage. As Ruins attempted to reposition himself, a sharp pain shot through his wound. He recognized it as a curse of radiance. Every movement now caused him agony, and he would soon risk losing his mobility altogether. Prime then invoked 5th grade nature magic, Titan's Wings, and soared into the air to prepare a finishing blow. Ruins managed to find cover and hastily bandage his injury. In that desperate moment, he remembered the ring of the fight. A look of pure determination filled his eyes as a new plan formed in his mind. Activating the Ogre's Fury skill, he launched himself directly at his airborne enemy. Duma, seeing the reckless attack, raised his legendary sword to use it as a shield. At the moment of impact, Ruins thrust forward the ring of the fight and its power activated. A loud crack echoed through the air as Prime's sword shattered into 1,000 pieces. Duma recoiled in shock, sustaining an injury from the blast and falling hard to the ground. Ruins had won the duel. Seth, who had watched the entire battle, could not hide his utter delight at the outcome. When Ruins turned back to Irene, however, he saw that her face had fallen. He began to apologize to her for his intervention in her fight. She simply shook her head and admitted that the fault was her own. Her overwhelming desire to defeat Duma had blinded her to reason, and in the end, she had put everyone in danger. Now that singular goal that had driven her for so long was gone. She then looked directly at Ruins and declared with firmness, "He is my new goal." In total, only 5 participants now remained on the island. Their team quickly dealt with the two other remaining contestants, after which the final moment arrived. Irene immediately announced that she was surrendering her position. She was in no condition to continue the battle. Now only Ruins and Seth remained. Seth had no intention of simply conceding the victory. The moment the final duel began, however, Ruins incapacitated him with a single blow. The entire Ignite team erupted in cheers, congratulating their champion. Even Irene and Seth joined in the enthusiastic celebration. Ruins finally understood that he had become the overall winner of the event. Duma, despite having accumulated many points, had dropped precipitously in the rankings, as had many other participants. Now, Ruins was determined to continue on this path to ensure he never lost his place at the top. Meanwhile, Jason was in a state of pure euphoria. He found himself sitting at the same table as Irene Prius and was practically ready to worship her, savoring every moment of their conversation. Duma, in contrast, was forced to reckon with his defeat. He had severely underestimated Ruins and had been completely unable to predict his actions. The fact that the formidable king had witnessed his loss was especially painful for him. The young man asked his assistant if King Terran had been looking for him, but he received no reply. At the same time, Professor Tyrion was overjoyed with how Ruins had proven himself. He had never expected that the boy would actually be capable of defeating Duma. King Terran, however, was disappointed but not entirely dejected. While he certainly did not rejoice in his own student's defeat, his interest in Ruins had only intensified. The great festival was rapidly drawing to a close. Several days had passed since the conclusion of the survival battle, and in the group competitions, the Ignite Academy had secured 4th place. All that remained was a final match between the main representatives, and the test involved a race on magically summoned beasts. The course was divided into 3 distinct stages: light athletics, martial arts, and a magic proficiency test. As the final battle was about to begin, Seth asked Ruins how he felt hearing the crowd chanting his name. He could only offer a slight grin in response. While he certainly enjoyed the adoration, he knew he could not afford to relax yet, as he had not achieved a complete victory. As long as Prime was not fully defeated, it was too early to truly triumph. The final stage was announced, and soon a shot rang out, signaling the start of the race. One by one, the participants summoned their magical mounts, activating all manner of enhancement spells. Everyone charged forward in a great rush, but Ruins, to everyone's confusion, remained standing at the starting line. The audience exchanged bewildered glances, wondering what the young man could possibly have planned. Meanwhile, the majority of the other participants had already covered a considerable distance. Incidentally, Dalian Malkin had proposed a temporary alliance to Irene, but she had refused his offer. Suddenly, Duma Prime appeared among the frontrunners. The young man easily dispatched several of the other competitors' magical beasts. He scanned the battlefield but could not see Ruins anywhere, a fact that deeply unsettled him. The boy approached Irene and demanded to know where her friend was. Even she, however, did not have an answer for him. At that exact moment, Ruins' voice rang out from behind them. Everyone turned in shock. Ruins was calmly catching up to the lead group, not even appearing to be tired. The surprised participants asked him where all the other racers were. He simply shrugged his shoulders and replied that there were no others left. His strategy was then revealed. In contrast to everyone else, he had started last so that he could observe all of his opponents and eliminate them one by one. His greatest strength was close-quarters combat, which meant he could not allow anyone to attack him from behind. At first, he had waited methodically. Then he began to tally his defeated foes. He reached 24 before he finally stopped counting. Despite their newfound friendship, he had also eliminated Seth without any hesitation. Now, Duma was ready to face him, but there were still several other participants ahead of them who needed to be dealt with. He did not waste any time and surged forward. The next section of the course was a labyrinth filled with traps. In ancient times, treasure had been stored here, but now it had become part of the competition. To pass through it, a participant needed to either use spells to neutralize the traps or find an alternative route. Casting spells, however, required time, and standing still was incredibly dangerous. Ruins decided to approach the problem differently. Using his player's eye, he began to scan the labyrinth's walls for structural weaknesses. After just a few moments, he located the precise point he was looking for. Irene and another participant exchanged skeptical looks. It seemed impossible to break through such a wall with one's bare hands. Ruins, however, did not hesitate for a second, delivering a powerful blow that shattered the stone wall. He had created an entirely new path through the maze, an act that sent a considerable shock through the remaining contestants. Duma, however, had no intention of wasting his time destroying walls. He plowed directly through the traps head-on, not even slowing down with an arrow sticking out of his shoulder. To Kuntara, this seemed like madness, but given the limited duration of enhancement spells, such a tactic actually made a certain kind of sense. At the subsequent stage, the competitors were required to cross a large water obstacle. Ruins possessed a speed advantage thanks to his time refraction skill, but Prime also refused to waste a single moment. When they both plunged into the water, he instantly froze the surface and galloped across it at full speed on his summoned ice horse. Ruins had no intention of being left behind. Using his fire magic, he melted the ice directly in front of him and broke forward through the water. The finish line at the stadium was now just ahead of them. Suddenly, Ruins smiled, because an idea had just occurred to him. He proposed a final rematch to Duma Prime. His rival only scowled, knowing full well that he was not in his best condition. The crowd was frozen with anticipation, as no one could confidently say who would emerge as the victor. Soon, an image appeared on the large viewing screens. Everyone saw Ruins standing on his feet before the form of his fallen rival. The victory was unmistakable. The crowd roared with joy as Ruins stood on the victor's rostrum, with Irene and Duma beside him. The great festival had officially come to an end. He was hailed as the magician of the next generation. He had proven to everyone, including himself, that he was capable of achieving greatness. A grand ball was organized in honor of the triumph, where all the great nobles had gathered. Ruins, however, felt no delight in the celebration, dreaming only of returning to the academy as soon as possible. But then he caught sight of Irene. She looked breathtakingly beautiful in an elegant evening gown. She expressed her surprise at how no one seemed to be rushing to speak with Ruins. She surmised that they simply did not know how to approach a person who now stood so far above everyone else. This, however, was not the only reason for the strange behavior of the other guests. It turned out that a certain powerful individual had become interested in Ruins, so much so that even the nobles were afraid to discuss the matter aloud. Finally, the evening banquet commenced, where representatives from all 32 academies were gathered at a single long table. The Dirty King was expected to sit at the center of the hall. Another empty seat, however, remained right next to his. The reason for this soon became clear. The Dirty King and the Crown Prince entered the hall together. King Terran was the first to speak. He made no attempt to hide his deep disappointment. In front of all the assembled guests, the man publicly humiliated his own students, calling them a shame. It was painfully obvious that he was using Ruins as a tool to oppose his rival, emphasizing his own superiority. This situation did not sit well with Ruins. The young man's attention was also captured by Summertan Rhynak, who did not take his eyes off him for a moment. King Terran then addressed the boy directly, asking how he felt after his victory. Ruins answered Terran honestly, stating that he did not appreciate his success being used to humiliate others. Irene immediately tried to quiet him, but it was already too late. Ruins continued, saying that the other students also deserved respect and should not be considered inferior simply because of a single defeat. Terran only offered a condescending grin. He warned the boy that such honesty could easily turn into hatred directed at him. A sudden laugh cut through the tense atmosphere. The Crown Prince, son of the Dirty King, laughed loudly and noted with amusement that Ruins had dared to talk back. His comment caused a stir throughout the hall. Irene let out a soft sigh of relief as the tension in the air finally dissipated. The formal evening was drawing to a close. Unexpectedly, however, the Crown Prince invited Ruins to join him for tea. It was the kind of invitation that one could not refuse. Ruins sensed that there was something more behind this request, and he was correct. The prince did not beat around the bush and, in a straightforward manner, invited the young man to come work for him. He promised to transfer him to the finest educational institution and to give him anything he could possibly desire. But in return, Ruins would have to change his citizenship. Ruins did not understand why he was the one chosen, given the many talented boys around them. The Empire already had plenty of skilled magicians. The Crown Prince explained, however, that his godfather had spoken specifically about Ruins. The boy paused for a moment before giving his honest refusal. It would have been the logical choice to accept the offer of a powerful patron, as nearly every magician seeks the support of the world's elite. Ruins, however, had no desire to become someone else's weapon. He had not yet experienced all that this world had to offer and was unwilling to shackle himself with oaths of loyalty. The Crown Prince asked if he thought he would come to regret this decision. Ruins simply shrugged, acknowledging that it was certainly a possibility. The prince then suggested they forget the conversation ever happened. After the young man had departed, The prince said to himself that he always gets everything he wants. Ruins is a gemstone, and he loves to collect rare stones. Sometime later, as Ruins was training, his familiar Kuntara noted the excellent physical condition the boy was in. The boy, however, did not particularly like being complimented on his form by what he perceived as a man. It was then that Kuntara revealed that she is, in fact, a woman. She is so unique that an incarnation such as herself has a gender, including the times they had bathed together in a completely new light. That detail, however, was not the primary concern. With his time at the festival drawing to a close, Ruins needed to bid farewell to his friends. Shortly thereafter, an official magician approached him to explain that tradition dictated the winner must fulfill certain minor obligations before departing. For this purpose, an enigmatic individual known only by the moniker Street Cat was assigned as his official escort. To his great surprise, when Ruins attempted to use his player's eye ability on this person, the scan yielded no information whatsoever. Their next destination was the Imperial Palace, where he was scheduled to receive an official congratulation and select a prize artifact. The acquisition of a relic was a mandatory part of his winnings, and with some luck, it was possible to obtain something truly powerful. In addition to the artifact, he was also required to choose a mission to undertake. Normally, students were not permitted to accept such tasks, but an exception was made for the victor of the great festival. Ruins was presented with a list of available missions from which he was free to choose anyone. His familiar Kuntara immediately noticed one particular task that piqued her interest, but more on that subject would come later. Upon arriving at the PN Palace, Ruins was met by the Crown Prince, who presented him with 10,000 gold coins as his prize money for the victory. Following this, he was expected at a meeting with the Master of the Tower, who was responsible for confirming his choice of mission. From the entire list of options, Ruins selected the single most difficult task available. When he entered the hall for his confirmation, he was met by the Dirty King himself. The mission he had chosen was considered nearly impossible, a fact he was immediately warned about. It was a quest connected to the Heavenly Mountain, the birthplace of Kingri, and according to legend, the place where the fight had lived for nearly a century. In ages past, the area had been inhabited by ogres, but the majority of them had perished in the Great War. The territory was now perceived as desolate and utterly devoid of life. Access to the region, however, was obstructed by a potent magic barrier that no one had ever been able to overcome. Many had tried to unravel the ancient spell that concealed the passage, but all such attempts had ended in failure. King Terran grew wary upon learning that Ruins had selected this particular mission. He questioned the boy directly, asking for his reason for wanting to go there. The young man replied that he was drawn by the sheer difficulty of the challenge, but the king did not seem to believe him. He offered to assign Ruins a different task if his only goal was to find a worthy challenge. If Ruins could genuinely solve the mountain's secret, he would either make history or become the first to fail so spectacularly. Terran clearly harbored suspicions, suggesting that Ruins possessed some hidden power connected to that place, and resolved to monitor his actions. After the tense conversation, the young man began to feel a sliver of doubt about his ability to handle the test. Kuntara, however, remained certain he would succeed, as his abilities had already surpassed normal human limitations. Later, another man, also accompanied by Street Cat, approached him. He introduced himself as Boar, which seemed odd, but it was explained to Ruins that everyone in their order used such designations. The day finally arrived when Ruins was to enter the artifact room and choose his relic. The powerful items were stored across 4 distinct zones. Zone X was the most enigmatic of all, housing rare and incredibly powerful relics. Ruins was guided through the other sections, but he was denied entry into Zone X. Gaining access to that area was only possible under a specific set of special circumstances. Not even the Emperor himself had the right to enter without explicit permission, a fact that only deepened Ruins' intrigue. The halls of artifacts were brimming with powerful relics, including legendary swords, grimoires, and ancient repositories of knowledge. Alta Million. Zone A contained magic books that could be studied on site, but it was forbidden to remove them from the hall. The greatest artifacts of pure knowledge were kept within Zone B. Ruins, however, did not select any of the items offered in these sections. He asked his escort if this had happened before, and was told that it had, but only on very rare occasions. Merely entering the artifact zones was already considered a mark of exceptional ability, as not every magician was granted such an honor. Ruins, however, remained focused on the one place he could not go, Zone X. Kuntara suddenly froze and sniffed the air sharply. She detected an incredibly rare aroma in this place, a scent that could only emanate from a true dragon. In that very moment, something truly unbelievable occurred. After 56 years of complete silence, the doors to Zone X swung open. The Dirty King was immediately informed of this event and was left in a state of utter shock. One of the 3 artifacts housed within had reacted to Ruins' presence. It was Kunhan's tooth, the most mysterious and enigmatic artifact in the entire collection. Only 3 legendary artifacts were stored within Zone X. The Al-Ghul staff, a symbol of the power of mankind's first magician, greatly enhanced its owner's magical power. This was the very artifact that King Terran had chosen 56 years ago. The Morshi armor was an artifact of absolute protection that had the ability to choose for itself whom it would serve. Kunhan's tooth was an ancient artifact that had not selected an owner for several hundred years. Today, however, it had chosen Ruins. The tooth was so immensely heavy that it typically required 6 adult men to even lift it. Yet Ruins raised it with a single hand as if it weighed nothing at all, as though he wielded the power of the Ogre itself. King Terran immediately gave the order to summon all of the court's magic scholars. After a moment of brief consideration, the young man accepted the artifact and decided to depart for the west at once to be closer to Heavenly Mountain. He was given 1 month to complete his chosen mission. His escort, Street Cat, advised him that it was wise to question everything. The first stop on his journey was Tishiren Castle, the city closest to Heavenly Mountain. This fortress had originally been constructed as a defense against the ogres that once terrorized these lands. When Ruins arrived there, however, he was met with a very different scene. The local men were drinking heavily in the middle of the day, seemingly without a care in the world. The reason for this, they explained, was that there was no one left to defend against, as the ogres had long since vanished. In any case, Ruins made his way to the stables, intending to procure a horse. It turned out, however, that there were no horses left in the entire city. This was a strange development, as he was told they had all been taken away recently, and it was hard to imagine who would need every horse in such a town. Kuntara sensed something peculiar about the situation right from the beginning of their journey. Ruins soon realized that they had been under observation from the moment they had set out. Deciding to get rid of his pursuers, Ruins bribed a hotel administrator, asking him not to share any information about his stay. He then went out for a walk to create the illusion that he had departed from the city. When he returned to the hotel, he was told that no one had come asking for him. There was, however, one very strange circumstance. The administrator had inexplicably vanished for a period of exactly 3 minutes. Ruins immediately recognized this as the work of 6th grade magic, which meant his opponent was a very dangerous magician. Back in his room, he discovered a note left by these very people. The message stated that they meant him no harm and were simply observing him. To Ruins, however, this sounded very much like a threat. The young man set out in search of his mysterious pursuers. Using his map, he was able to track their movements, but they quickly realized he had started to play a game with them and was attempting to lure them into an open area. They moved to intercept him, but suddenly the young man's trail broke off completely. Before they could understand what had transpired, he launched his own attack. After eliminating 2 of them with lightning speed, he was left facing their leader. The man simply laughed at his efforts. After calling Ruins a true monster, the leader disappeared as if dissolving into thin air. The boy examined the bodies of the defeated men and noticed mysterious tattoos on their necks. Kuntara recognized them immediately as the sign of the Vicious Circle. These people were members of a secret organization known for its dirty dealings and dangerous operations. No one knew much about them beyond the distinctive pattern they wore on their bodies. Ruins reflected that they seemed weaker to him than the opponents he had faced at the Great Festival. Yet one of them had managed to mentally penetrate the hotel administrator's mind. This implied that their leader was far more dangerous than the others. As always, Ruins began to develop a strategy, planning to force the last remaining spy to reveal himself. The very next day, the young man set off toward Heavenly Mountain. The journey was long and monotonous, but as he neared his destination, his circle of power began to vibrate intensely. This sensation confirmed that he had arrived at the correct location. Everyone knew the legend that the fight had once lived here. Of far greater importance, however, was the barrier that no one had ever been able to overcome. It was as if Kuntara knew something, and she prompted the boy with a thought. This barrier could not be destroyed by an ordinary person, but what about the ogres? People believed the ogres had died out after the war, but Kuntara had always doubted this. Ruins placed his palm flat against the barrier and spoke to those within. He announced that he held Kunhan's tooth and asked them to open the door. Abruptly, the massive barrier began to collapse. Just then, the same man who had been following him appeared from behind. Before the man could do anything, however, Ruin spun around and struck him with his fist. The very earth seemed to shudder from the force of the blow. Since it was clearly a trap, the boy tied the man up. At that moment, a real ogre emerged from the now open passage. With a single swing of its enormous club, it obliterated the tied-up man. The creature then turned to Ruins and demanded to know who he was. Kuntara warned the boy to be cautious, as these creatures possessed primal animalistic instincts. Ruins, however, did not feel threatened, and when the ogre saw Kunhan's tooth, it allowed him to pass inside the barrier. The world on the other side was completely different. Ruins found himself in what appeared to be another dimension entirely. The other ogres stared at him with bewildered expressions, unable to understand what a human was doing there. Yet they sensed that something about him was different. Kuntara whispered to Ruins that they would most likely not harm him as long as he was carrying Kunhan's tooth. The ogre led the young man to the summit of the mountain, where their leader, Chieftain Harhan, was located. Harhan remained silent for a long time before finally asking if he truly possessed Kunhan's tooth. Ruins simply nodded in confirmation. The leader stared at him, contemplating what to do, unsure whether to kill the young man or feed him to the beasts. None of them believed that the artifact could have truly chosen him. Ruins then presented the tooth for all of them to see. The young man was then asked directly who he was. Ruins decided not to delay and asked if they knew the name Draconia. The leader was shocked that he even knew such a name. Ruins stunned him even further by stating that he possessed information from Kingri, causing Harhan to rise to his full height and roar in surprise that his old friend was still alive. The boy replied that he was now an artifact and was working as a professor. A long, heavy pause followed, until one of the other ogres suddenly stepped forward and declared that if his best friend was a professor, then he must be one too. The ogres no longer had any desire to kill him. Now they wished only to test his strength. Ruins was sent to their combat arena, which was only the beginning of his trial. The young man had to undergo a rite of initiation to win the recognition of the ogre clan. The one and only way to prove his strength was through a competition in arm wrestling. He was set to face Omarush, son of Omarokon, who was himself the son of the chieftain. This particular ogre was of a gigantic size and possessed incredible strength, and most of the others expected him to tear the human challenger to pieces. Ruins understood that their physical strength was not comparable and even asked Kuntara if they would kill him if he lost. His familiar, however, only shrugged, leaving the outcome a mystery. Despite his fears, Ruins knew that Kunhan's tooth granted him a bonus of 1,000 points to his strength. Although the difference in power between him and an ordinary human was vast, Omarush was also no ordinary creature. The match began. Ruins struggled with all his might but was ultimately defeated. Even though he channeled all of his power, his strength was insufficient to overcome the giant. The most amazing part of the match was not his defeat, but how long he had managed to hold out. For the ogres, this was an unprecedented feat. Any other human would have lost instantly, and through his struggle, he had earned their respect. Ruins received a new task from his system: win in arm wrestling. A great feast was arranged in honor of his impressive resistance, where they served incredibly delicious food. Kuntara, incidentally, had never doubted that Ruins would survive, but had remained silent to see his reaction. Even amidst the merriment, Ruins could not shake the question of why these creatures had sealed themselves off from the outside world. Later, Omarush approached him, calling him a strong man and asking what he intended to do with the tooth of their first leader. The boy had not even suspected that the artifact could be crafted into something else. Before this, Ruins had been contemplating how to best utilize Kunhan's tooth. In contrast to the Algol staff or the Morshi armor, it lacked an obvious, direct purpose. He had been thinking of fashioning it into a mace, but Kuntara had advised him to put those thoughts aside for later. Now it turned out that something far more interesting could be done with it. Kunhan's tooth was incredibly durable, and very few individuals could process it. But for a master blacksmith like Omarush, this was not a problem. He asked Ruins if he had a specific idea in mind, as he was capable of creating almost anything. A spark of enthusiasm flashed in Ruins' eyes. Half a month had passed since his arrival on Heavenly Mountain. During this time, he helped the ogres on their hunts, performed his daily training, and, of course, continued to compete in arm wrestling. By that point, his track record included 15 consecutive losses. This frustrated him greatly, but Omarush noted that the boy's power was steadily growing and that he was beginning to understand how to manage it. His primary goal, however, was to defeat Omarush before he had to leave the village. A few days later, Ruins finally managed to accomplish this feat. The expression on the ogre's face at that moment was a sight to behold. After a stunned pause, Omarush addressed him by name for the first time and admitted that he was now worthy of his new weapon. The weapon was a pair of gloves forged from Kunhan's tooth. Upon wearing them, Ruins received a bonus of plus 2,000 to his strength and a new skill called Will of the Leader. Feeling a surge of immense power, Ruins decided to arrange a test for himself. He gathered all the warriors of Heavenly Mountain and challenged them all to arm wrestling. The ogres enthusiastically accepted his challenge. Kuntara noted that the fight had also loved such competitions. Over a 30-year life among the ogres, he had only managed to defeat 17 rivals in a row. Ruins felt an incredible power welling up inside him and was certain that he would not lose a single time. In any case, the experiment was conducted successfully. It was now, however, time for him to leave. He said his goodbyes to the inhabitants of the village, who thanked him for his time and shook his hand as a sign of respect. The Dirty King had not received any news about Ruins for a long time. No matter how hard he tried to find out something, all his inquiries yielded no results. The only information he had was the sighting of 2 magicians with heavy injuries, but their commander had never appeared. Soon, an assistant approached him and reported that Ruins had arrived in the city of Ruvadan. He was immediately summoned to see the chapter head. During the subsequent interrogation, Ruins lied, claiming that he had failed his mission. He had no intention of revealing the secret of the ogres. The Dirty King did not believe him, remarking that the boy was a terrible liar. For a person wielding such a powerful artifact, failure seemed highly suspicious. But the king did not press the matter. Instead, he asked what exactly Ruins had seen on the mountain, hinting that he knew about the ogres. The boy knew that the king could likely penetrate his mind, but would not do so because of his status. In the end, he was released, but he sensed that they would continue to monitor him. Upon returning to the dormitory, he was inundated with congratulations from his peers. Although 2 months had passed since his departure, he was still regarded as a hero. Among the letters he received were invitations from various noble families, including several from the princes of different kingdoms. Jason, who was sitting nearby, asked Ruins how he planned to spend the upcoming holidays. The boy's answer was different from what it would have been in the past. He had avoided returning to his home in Ardell for a very long time, considering himself too weak and unworthy. Now, however, he no longer had any reason to avoid his hometown. Upon the young man's return to his hometown, his transformed appearance drew astonished looks from the local residents. In a moment, his younger sister, who had grown significantly in his absence but retained all her former sweetness, rushed up to greet him. Upon hearing the news of his son's arrival, his father promptly convened a gathering of the entire family. There was much to discuss, and Ruins recounted all his adventures, carefully omitting only the existence of his player's eye ability. His relatives were left in a state of shock as they learned of his newfound strength, his victories, and the numerous trials he had overcome. Just then, his father's assistant, Baggins, attempted to speak, but his father tried to silence him. Ruins, however, insisted that he be allowed to hear the truth. It was revealed that after their son had become famous, a great many letters and offers had arrived in Ardell. While all the proposals had been rejected, one particular problem had become clear through these interactions. A man named Pilos Monzo, the head of the Monzo trading city, had begun to apply significant pressure on them. The city of Monzo played a crucial role in Ardell's economy, as the majority of their goods were sold through its markets. Pilos had issued a threat that if Ruins did not agree to become their city's sponsored magician, he would slash their financing and severely limit their supply lines. Such an action would completely destroy Ardell's economy, and the state's coffers were already beginning to run dry. Ruins was deeply troubled by this news. He resolved to travel to Monzo personally to meet with Pilos. Before he departed, his father's assistant gave him provisions for the journey. In that moment, it also came to light that Ardell had been surviving financially on the personal funds of the city's head. The ordinary citizens had been kept unaware of the true extent of their problems, and this revelation upset Ruins even more. He could not understand why his father had concealed this from him. In response, the young man handed Baggins a box containing 10,000 gold coins. This money, he instructed, was to be used for the development and improvement of the city. He wanted Ardell to become self-sufficient and no longer dependent on external economic factors. Furthermore, the young man issued a directive to begin expanding the city's territory. Having addressed these immediate issues, Ruins set out for the city of Monzo. Upon reaching the trading hub, he made his way directly to the Pylos estate. Many rumors circulated about the man himself, who was widely known as a masterful manipulator. When the young man arrived, the guards at the gate, upon hearing the name Ruins, reacted with disdain as if he were some common rabble. They spoke dismissively of his father, who had apparently visited here often but had never commanded any respect. A surge of anger coursed through Ruins because of this blatant disrespect, and he responded with a show of force. When the landlord himself appeared, the man feigned an expression of ecstatic joy at the meeting. With a deep bow, he greeted Ruins with a wide smile, hailing him as the magician of the next generation. Ruins sarcastically replied that the man might as well not raise his head at all if he was so embarrassed by his visit. He immediately pointed out to Pylos that his guards were behaving inappropriately and were in dire need of better training. To emphasize his point, he struck one of the guards, once again demonstrating his overwhelming strength. Pylos remained silent, though it was clear from his expression that he was seething with rage. Once inside the estate, Ruins took note of a frightening collection of taxidermied animals. He refused an offer of tea, suspecting a trap, even as the Lord assured him of the contrary. When the conversation finally turned to the purpose of his visit, the host's mask of kindness immediately vanished. The landlord began to speak openly and without pretense, at which point Ruins stated that the man was obligated to restore their original trade prices. Pylos declared that a rustic like Ruins should be on his knees before him. Following this declaration, the Lord commanded his knights to kill the young man. His intention was to turn Ruins into the newest exhibit for his grotesque collection. He had, however, severely miscalculated his opponent's capabilities. Ruins dealt with the adversaries with ease, activating his Will of the Leader skill, which was amplified by his Kunhan's tooth gloves. With a single powerful blow, he sent one of the knights flying into the rest of the group, causing complete chaos. The building itself was smashed to pieces when he unleashed his explosive mana. A wave of panic ensued as the Lord's expensive collection of stuffed animals was reduced to ashes. Pylos himself fell to his knees in terror, and Ruins compelled him to pay compensation in the amount of 10 times his losses. In addition, he forced the man to increase the prices for Ardel's goods, thereby solving his hometown's problem. After this, he returned home, only to be met with an unexpected meeting. Standing on his doorstep was Irene. Back during the banquet celebrating the end of the festival, she had promised Ruins that she would one day visit his homeland. Now she had made good on her word. His father was pleased to meet her, but his younger sister immediately displayed clear signs of jealousy toward her brother's guest. At the dinner table, he was immediately barraged with questions about whether she was his lover. The conversation, however, quickly shifted to more important topics. Irene went to inspect the surrounding area, leaving Ruins alone with his father. He once again asked his son whether Irene was his girlfriend. Soon after, however, their discussion took on a more business-like tone. Baggins entered the office carrying the same box that Ruins had handed over to him earlier. His father attempted to return the money to Ruins, but his son refused to take it. He considered the funds an investment in Ardel's future, not his personal property. The young man then revealed to his father that he knew about his personal donations to maintain the city, and that this money was to restore those funds. The head of the city was, of course, not pleased that Baggins had shared this information without his permission. In the end, he showed Ruins the 3,600 gold coins that were left in the city's coffers, which the chapter had believed was sufficient. For Ruins, however, it was incomprehensible why he would refuse an amount that was 3 times larger, and Baggins also failed to understand such stubbornness. When the young man went outside, he saw Irene and his sister walking together holding hands. His sister called Irene sister, which seemed to surprise the visiting girl. Irene remarked that the young man was very fortunate to have such a sister. During their walk, Irene shared her impressions of the city, but upon noticing his thoughtful expression, she asked what was on his mind. Ruins admitted that he wanted to dedicate himself to the development of his homeland, but was unsure where to even begin. This answer seemed to touch her slightly. She had traveled such a long way to see him, and yet he could not even stop thinking about business matters. To make amends for his distraction, the young man began to ask her about her journey. It turned out that she had arrived in just 2 days by choosing a route through the southern mountains. This fact completely stunned Ruins. The southern mountains were widely considered to be impassable due to the high concentration of monsters and evil spirits. If Irene had been able to cross them, however, then there was a possibility of establishing a trade path through that region. This idea represented a potential breakthrough for his city. If they could establish trade relations with the city of Eightlek, Ardell could finally become an independent territory. Inspired by this new possibility, Ruins thanked Irene for her help and immediately went to speak with his father. His initial enthusiasm, however, was quickly dampened. His father explained that he had already tried to realize this very idea, but that 8 separate trading guilds had refused to cooperate. They did not believe that a partnership with Ardell could be of any benefit to them. Baggins confirmed that this issue had been discussed at length in the past but had always resulted in a dead end. Ruins, however, was not prepared to give up so easily, believing that one refusal was not a reason to abandon the entire idea. Now that he held the status of the Great Festival's winner, he hoped that his proposal would be perceived differently. His father saw no reason not to let him try and gave him permission to take the business into his own hands. When Ruins left the house, he met Irene once again. She admitted that she had crossed the border of Ardell illegally, but that it no longer mattered. Since she was already there, she offered to accompany him on his journey to Aitlek. The path proved to be difficult, even with their combined strength and skills. They were forced to face a great many difficulties along the way. Such minor details, however, were of little concern to Ruins. During their travels, they stumbled upon a den of werewolves. A battle was unavoidable, and the creatures posed a serious danger. After locating and destroying the alpha werewolf, however, they forced the rest of the pack to flee. Following this encounter, Ruins received a quest completion notice and a reward: the mane of a silver werewolf. He now had to find someone who was truly in need of this rare item. A few days later, they finally arrived at their destination. The security at the entrance asked if they had a scheduled meeting, but Ruins simply stated his name, after which he was immediately granted entry. Once inside the Golden Hall, the young man's attention was immediately drawn to the magnificent gold figures that adorned the room. The entire atmosphere of the place was saturated with a spirit of immense luxury. He reminded himself, however, that he had not come here to admire the interiors, but to resolve important issues. When he entered the main hall, he was met by 8 representatives who, to his surprise, addressed him as an ostentatious guest. He had not realized that his victory at the festival would grant him such a high status here. Without any unnecessary introductions, he announced that he had arrived to discuss trade relations between Ardell and Aitlek. A tense silence immediately fell over the hall. Kuntara instantly noticed how the representatives' faces soured, a clear sign of their dissatisfaction with the topic. They began to whisper amongst themselves, trying to recall what Ardell even was. Someone mentioned that it was a small land in the south of the Radion Kingdom, known mostly for its fish and potatoes. They also remembered that Ruin's father had previously attempted to broker a deal, but they had refused him because it was obvious that such a union held no profit for them. Finally, one of the senior representatives declared that there was nothing to discuss. Ruins understood that they saw him as nothing more than a minor future lord attempting to get his hands on their money. He was not, however, going to retreat, and firmly demanded that they listen to him until he was finished. He then threw a bag containing 30,000 gold coins onto the table. The hall fell silent as all the representatives stared in stunned disbelief. Only after this display were they prepared to listen to his proposal. Aitlek was a great trading state where 8 major lakes were located, and power was held jointly by 8 trading guilds that governed the country. Now the representatives, who were the heads of these guilds, showed a keen interest in the negotiations. Ruins announced his intention to purchase weaponry in the amount of 30,000 gold, and in return, he demanded permission to trade Ardell's products in their markets. He was immediately asked if he was preparing for war, as such a large purchase of weapons looked like preparations for hostilities. The amount also raised questions, as 30,000 gold was equivalent to the 3-year budget of a small lord or the annual budget of a mid-sized city. Ruins simply noted that where there is power, there is wealth, which meant that he should invest in strengthening his territory. He then asked if any of those present specialized in weaponry. Everyone in the room immediately turned to look at the first representative, a young woman whose family dealt in the supply of weapons, ores, and fleets. Despite her youth, her gaze was cold and incredibly insightful. She asked what use he would find for all this weaponry, stating that this information was extremely important for her as a supplier. The first step in his grand plan, Ruins explained, was to hunt the monsters living near his territory. The weapons were intended to be not just a tool for protection, but the key to creating a trade route between Ardell and Aitlek that would pass through the southern mountains. The moment he voiced this idea, one of the representatives sharply demanded that he not mention those lands. Irene did not immediately understand the reason for this sudden tension, but Ruins noticed a look of concern on the face of the first representative. Cecilia, the head of the Valtrak family, announced that it was impossible to cross the southern mountains because a powerful demon named Sito lived there. Ruins calmly replied that they had crossed those lands by themselves just the night before. But Cecilia did not believe him and called it a lie. He then presented the mane of the silver werewolf, proving that the threat had been eliminated and that he had completed the task of delivering the artifact. Cecilia's expression changed dramatically in that instant. Suddenly, she burst into tears, which stunned everyone present in the hall. 3 days after the negotiations, Cecilia went to see Ruins, admitting that she had never thought she would be able to approach those mountains again, and offered him her thanks. Now that the monster had been destroyed, she could finally look upon that path again without feeling horror. After all, ever since it had killed her father, she had been unable to overcome her grief. Ruins realized that if it were possible to establish a route through the southern mountains, it could open up new opportunities with Aitlek, as this path would significantly reduce both travel time and expenses. Cecilia fully supported this idea, declaring that her family, the Valtrak, would help with its implementation. For Ruins, this was a complete surprise. He had only hoped to strengthen relations with Aitlek through a weapons trade, but now he had received a much greater level of support. To clarify the details, he asked if they were officially accepting his proposal. Cecilia responded in the affirmative and added that goods from Ardell would now be sold and purchased at a price above the market rate. The deal was concluded, and soon after, Ruins and Irene journeyed back to Ardell to share the news with his father. During their travels, Irene noted that Ruins praised Cecilia often, calling her a worthy person. In any case, Ruins declared that Ardell would be changing soon, and he invited Irene to come and see their town again in the future. When he returned home, his father and Baggins were shocked to learn that Ardell's products would now be sold at a price above the market standard. It was even more surprising that the initiative had come from the representatives of Aitlek themselves. The real shock, however, was that Cecilia had personally given her word on the matter. Everyone knew about her personal tragedy and her cold disposition, so her decision caused a significant stir. His father was immensely happy with these changes, but he was even happier that his son had matured so much and had managed this on his own. Following this, Ruins asked to be entrusted with another important matter. He intended to avenge his mother by launching a hunt on the Chinhin Plain. When Ruins was only 6 years old, his birthday celebration had turned into a genuine nightmare. Mud people had attacked their village, and dozens of people had died. The most painful blow for the young boy, however, had been the death of his own mother. Since that day, her image had begun to fade in his memory, and only a portrait served as a reminder of her face. He had made an oath to himself then that he would become stronger and never again allow such tragedies to occur. Returning to business after the conversation with his father, Ruins gave instructions for the destruction of the local monsters, and the residents began to train with great diligence, which pleased him immensely. Irene also noticed some interesting techniques being used in their preparations and asked who was teaching the people. Ruins replied that a military leader named Sir Boldvar Peyton was responsible for their training. In the past, he had been known by the nickname Flash and had fought for the kingdom. There was a time when his strength had inspired fear in his enemies. But now he led a more measured and quiet life. Noticing Ruins, Peyton greeted him with a smile, remarking that he had once again managed to stir up excitement, first with his victory at the festival, and now with his intention to go on a hunt. Irene, not wanting to miss the opportunity, introduced herself and added with excitement that she was glad to meet the legendary Saint with a Spear. She confessed that she had read many stories about him and knew that he was one of the 11 most talented knights. She was particularly impressed by the story of how he had single-handedly broken through the lines of 10 magicians of the highest rank. Peyton only smiled, noting that he was no longer the same person he had been in the past. Ruins realized with some amazement that he knew nothing about this important part of his teacher's past. Sir Peyton replied, however, that the boy might know him even better than anyone else. After all, only Ruins remembered him as the man who used to fish by the house, who walked with him when he was a child, and who played with him in his youth. The young man admitted that he had indeed seen a different side of him, unlike all the others. After this exchange, Peyton announced that today, Ruins would have a practice session. They first watched his younger sister's training session. Her skill with the sword was amazing, and even Ruins found himself impressed. Despite her confident attacks, however, Boldvar fought her the entire time using only his left hand. When the lesson concluded, she was highly praised, with it even being noted that the girl was already surpassing her brother in sword technique. Ruins silently agreed with this assessment. Now it was his turn to train. When the boy was 9 years old, Peyton had also given him training, explaining that a magician needs to be able to fight knights on an equal footing. Now, possessing martial arts skills and new knowledge, Ruins was ready to show what he had learned over the years. The battle, however, did not last long, and the young man was completely defeated. Peyton noted that his skills had improved significantly over the past 7 years, though Ruins, lying on the ground, did not feel much joy from this compliment. The young man became curious about how strong his teacher had been in his youth. Boldvar could not give him a precise answer, as it had been too long ago. Ruins then recalled Gulter Perante, the only 6-star knight in Radion. Peyton only smiled, remarking that 20 years ago, when he had left the Order, he had possessed 7 stars, a revelation that made the young man freeze in place. At that moment, a new test appeared before him: to deliver a critical blow to his master within 3 days. The time restriction put him on high alert, as he was clearly not at a level to handle such a task at his current strength. Irene noted that Ruins was incredibly lucky, as not everyone gets the chance to train with a 7-star knight. Realizing the incredible chance he had been given, Ruins began his training with even greater determination. For 3 consecutive days, he trained without pause, working persistently to complete his assigned task. And his immense efforts were not in vain. After many long hours of training, Ruins was left with only one final task to fulfill: to land a critical blow on his teacher. Only half an hour remained before the deadline, and he could not afford to give up now, as he had achieved a huge breakthrough over the last few sleepless nights. His entire family came out to watch this final battle. Even his sister tried to dissuade him, believing that the training had gone too far. Ruins, however, was insistent, assuring everyone that this would be his final attempt and requesting just half an hour more. He opted for a change in tactics, deciding to fight unarmed, confident that he had finally learned to anticipate his mentor's movements. Furthermore, he was granted permission to incorporate magic into the duel, which would allow him to unleash his full potential at close range. Boldvar had no intention of making the task any easier, stating that he would engage with the utmost seriousness. He prevented Ruins from getting close, forcing the young man to constantly search for a new angle of approach. The young man realized that the strategy he had employed against Duma Prime was not universally effective. Boldvar began to read his movements and, at a critical moment, launched a sharp, decisive attack. Ruins, however, countered with a light spell, momentarily blinding his opponent and catching him by surprise. He immediately offered an apology to his mentor. He understood that such a simple technique would not have worked against the man in a real battle 30 years ago. Nevertheless, the assigned task had been successfully completed. At that moment, his sister rushed toward him with a reproachful look, indignant that he could knock down their ailing teacher. Ruins, however, exhausted but pleased with the outcome, felt nothing but gratitude toward his mentor. The mentor offered him praise before going to refresh himself, clearly satisfied with how the test had concluded. The holidays were finally over, and the time had come for him to return to the academy. On the road with his father, Ruins noticed a group of workers who had been sent by the Valtrak family. They realized that the scale of construction was expanding and that Ardell would soon have fully fledged trade routes. A deep sense of satisfaction washed over Ruins, knowing that the beginning of a great endeavor had been laid. Before his departure, the young man once again handed his father a box, this one containing 12,000 gold coins. His father was reluctant to accept it, but Ruins insisted, stating that the money must go toward the development of their homeland. They shared a final hug as they said their goodbyes. Thus concluded his vacation, which had turned out to be incredibly productive. Irene set off with Ruins on the return journey, though they knew their paths would soon have to diverge. Before they parted ways, Irene promised that she would help him destroy monsters after their graduation. For her, following Ruins had become an important objective, as she still harbored a desire to one day surpass him. When the young man crossed the border and re-entered the eastern region, he noticed a large number of people gathered nearby. His attention was suddenly drawn to a fight taking place. One of several bandits was striking a young knight who was kneeling before the assembled crowd. The young man was begging them to let his sister go, screaming that he too was a knight and would not let this go unpunished. His words, however, only seemed to amuse the villains. They declared that his family had failed to pay their debts, which meant he would have to pay the price with his life. One of the bandits grinned cruelly and said that he would sell the knight's sister into slavery. The young man lunged forward in a desperate attempt to fight back, but was immediately met with a strong blow to the face and then grabbed by the hair. The bandits paid no mind to the crowd, openly mocking the knight right in front of them. Ruins was outraged by the spectacle. Just as he stepped forward to intervene, the local townspeople stopped him, warning that it was dangerous to get involved. They reminded him that the men before him belonged to Andy Lambert's gang, and that anyone who crossed them risked their life. Ruins only offered a sarcastic grin and asked what everyone else was doing then, since they were content to stand by idly in the face of such injustice. The crowd looked away in shame, and he resolutely strode forward. With a single fluid motion, he sent one of the aggressors to the ground, who immediately surrendered. The boy who had been beaten stared at him in utter amazement. That evening, Ruins went to the young man's home. The boy introduced himself as Hans, and his story was a sad one. Their family had fallen into debt because of his father's drinking, and now creditors wanted to sell his sister into slavery. Ruins asked who these bandits were, and the boy, with a grim expression, replied that Andy Lambert's group was incredibly cruel. If someone angered them, they were known to torture the person, tie them to horses, or abandon them to die in the desert. Hans admitted that he had heard of Ruins as the representative from the Great Festival. Ruins then asked if he was acquainted with Sir Gulter Parante. The boy was surprised at how he could have guessed this, and Ruins explained that he had overheard the bandits referring to him as a knight from the Foldren territory. It turned out that Hans's captain often spoke of Ruins, admiring his strength and numerous achievements. The boy dreamed of becoming as strong as his mentor, but was ranked last at the academy, for which he constantly suffered ridicule. The only person who had ever believed in his potential was Gulter Parante. Ruins recognized his own story in this tale. When everyone else had criticized and humiliated him, his professor and the head of the academy had believed in him. Their conversation did not last long before the bandits returned, this time intending to finish off Hans's family once and for all. When they burst into the house, however, Ruins stood before them, waiting alone. He pulled on his gloves, concentrated his power, and prepared himself for a new battle. His opponents rushed him all at once, but he was far too experienced now after his training with the Great Knight. Ruins used the skill of the Steel Destroyer, and when his fist made contact with an enemy's weapon, their sword shattered from the blow. The remaining bandits froze in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how such a thing was possible. Unleashing his full power, he defeated them all single-handedly. Those who could still move were already begging for mercy, but the situation suddenly changed dramatically. The leader of the gang, Nozel, grabbed Hans's sister, putting a knife to her throat and ordering his men to continue the fight. He viciously shouted that there should be no pleas for mercy and that they needed to tie Ruins up instead. The situation had become critical. Ruins was unsure what to do, as one wrong move could mean the end for Hans's sister. Suddenly, with a sharp and decisive movement, Hans slit the gang leader's throat. The shocked bandits immediately fled in a panic. The young man stood frozen in place, horrified by the fact that he had just killed a man. Ruins calmly placed a hand on his shoulder in an attempt to comfort him. He noticed a blue aura emanating from Hans, which signified that he had just reached the 4th knightly rank. Although the boy still did not know how to control his mana, it was a huge leap in his progress. Now, nothing more threatened his sister. With the Hans family saved, Ruins himself departed for the academy the very next day. As he returned to the academy, he was struck by the realization of how much he had missed it. Whereas before the boy had never wanted the holidays to end, he was now genuinely glad to be back. Upon meeting Jason, he was immediately flooded with questions about what he had been doing all this time. Ruins considered telling him the whole story. But since so much had happened, he simply replied that he had been training with a sword. Jason snorted, saying that holidays were meant for relaxation, not for exhausting training. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Professor Hadel. He invited Ruins to come to the window, and when he looked out, he saw that they had guests. Someone very important had arrived at the academy. Ruins instantly guessed who it was, as he had already exchanged letters with them, but he had not expected them to arrive so quickly. As soon as the carriage door opened, 2 young men stepped out. They turned out to be the princes, Cross de Radion and Foster de Radion. Ruins greeted them respectfully, and they immediately began to argue amongst themselves. He quickly understood the true nature of their visit. Both princes wished to lure him to their respective sides to increase their chances of becoming the next crown prince. Ruins had no intention of making a hasty decision and suggested that the 3 of them discuss the matter privately. Radion remained the weakest state on the continent, and a conflict was brewing within the kingdom between the 2 princes, who supported different political factions. One adhered to strict monarchical traditions, while the other strove for sweeping reforms. Their visit to the academy was entirely expected, as both were attempting to enlist the support of Ruins. Even in this setting, they could not resist bickering, quarreling over who would get the seat next to him. Ruins quickly perceived that both princes behaved in a rather infantile manner but was in no hurry to take a side. He announced that he had no intention of becoming anyone's vassal and planned to return to Ardell after graduation to develop his own lands. However, since he would remain a citizen within the kingdom, he could still become a source of strength for it. The princes immediately assured him that they would assist in the development of his territories, providing both financial support and resources. Ruins took advantage of the moment and put forth his own counter-conditions. He demanded that both princes support his projects and also allocate military forces to help clear the lands of monsters. The young man was not going to choose between them. It was more beneficial for him to have both of them working for him. Pleased by the fact that he would not be leaving the kingdom, the princes appointed him the defender of the royal family and declared him a national treasure of Radion. Even though it was an unofficial title, its significance was difficult to overestimate. The academy was immediately plunged into fervent debate, as the coveted role of royal defender, a position historically held only by members of the Gerishel family, had now been bestowed upon Ruins. Among the crowd of discussing students, Mikkel appeared. He was boiling with anger, as he could not stand hearing himself being discussed in such a manner. In a fit of rage, he declared that after graduation he would crush everyone himself regardless of their status. Even after he was caught using prohibited substances during their fight, his family had managed to avoid expulsion, and he had returned to the academy. Ruins coldly reminded him that the princes now held a very different opinion of the Gerishel family. Mikkel only grinned and said that the battle was not over yet, and that they would see who would have the last laugh. Jason simply shrugged, noting that Mikkel was merely jealous of Ruins. After his triumph at the Great Festival, the Gerishel's reputation had been greatly shaken, which had delivered a severe blow to their pride. In any case, it was customary for graduates to arrive at the academy during the second semester to conduct practical exercises. Everyone was eagerly anticipating who their mentors would be. As it turned out, Shaquille Gerishel appeared before them. Since this semester was focused on practical application, invited graduates were tasked with training the younger magicians and knights. Shaquille decided to begin with a lecture on his family's influence over the palace magicians. He spoke with great pride about how powerful the Gerishels were, and then, as if by chance, he glanced at Ruins. The elder brother sarcastically stated that if they were to indulge commoners, the lives of everyone else could become as negligible as his. In response, Ruins replied that out of a dozen heaps of garbage, nothing of value will ever emerge. In the best-case scenario, it would just become an even larger landfill. Shaquille immediately seized upon his words, asking if he was calling him garbage. Their verbal sparring quickly became more fierce. Shaquille brought up his brother's stories, calling Ruins a loser, but he calmly retorted by reminding everyone that it was this same loser who had humbled Mikkel on the dueling floor. As the rivalry between their families only intensified, the elder Gerishel began to openly recruit students, offering them a place by his side. Some students chose to support Ruins, while others sided with his enemies. Two distinct camps began to form at the academy: supporters of Ardell and adherents of the Gerishels. Suddenly, the head of the academy summoned Ruins to discuss the situation developing within the school. He asked how things were progressing among the student body, to which Ruins replied that everything was proceeding as usual, aside from the tension associated with Shaquille's presence. The headmaster then decided to speak more about him. Shaquille was incredibly popular thanks to his appearance, his eloquence, and his impeccable behavior. A cold and calculating nature, however, was hidden behind this flawless facade. He longed for power and was willing to do anything to achieve his goals. Ruins began to contemplate how one could possibly resist such a person. The conversation smoothly transitioned to the topic of an upcoming special class. The headmaster mentioned that he had suggested to Shaquille that they organize a joint training session between the graduates and the current students, but he had refused. Ruins immediately went to the lesson to speak with Shaquille personally. Without wasting any time, he stated that he had heard about the headmaster's proposal and that the representative of the Gerishels had rejected it. The other students who were present during this conversation lit up with enthusiasm for the idea, but Shaquille immediately retorted that he saw no point in it. He declared that it would be nothing more than a waste of time. Ruins, however, had anticipated a similar answer. The young man immediately pointed out the inherent contradiction in his statement. The graduates were supposed to be teaching the younger students, yet they themselves were avoiding joint classes. Was this not clear evidence of his fear of a direct battle? Shaquille laughed and said that even if Ruins had won the Great Festival, he was still not good enough. He added that he could not stand up to a real weapon, which meant that such training was simply meaningless. The other students, however, demanded to see Chakil's abilities for themselves. At that moment, Mikkel intervened. He stated with a grin that this was an ideal opportunity to publicly humiliate Ruins and urged his brother to accept the challenge. Chakil squinted but ultimately agreed, warning Ruins that he would come to regret it. Since this was to be an official lesson, the Knights of Foldren would also be taking part in it. After the discussion, they shook hands, but at that moment, Ruins applied his strength. He squeezed the other's palm with a force that seemed like a clear warning. Then, as if by chance, he uttered a mysterious phrase, advising him to prepare for a surprise. 3 days later, the Knights of Foldren arrived at the academy, and their appearance was met with universal enthusiasm. Among them was Sir Gulter, who immediately greeted Ruins, congratulated him on his success at the great festival, and asked him to look after his interns. While the knights were meeting the students, Ruins noticed a group of students mocking Hans. They were humiliating him just as they had before, as if it were a usual form of entertainment for them. Stepping closer, Ruins asked what was happening here. One of the group, Malti of Gengen, a representative of Foldren, answered him. He began to boast that his father commanded the Gold Knights, but Ruins did not understand the relevance of all this. When the young man demanded an explanation again, Maltiv replied with a grin that the commoner had stopped obeying them, so they had decided to arrange a training session for him. Ruins stated that Hans was his friend, a comment which caused laughter among the representatives of the nobility, who considered it logical that commoners would find their own kind. Malti added that the Ardell family did not deserve any respect, and that conversing with Ruins was unpleasant for him. Suddenly, Chakil approached them, and it became clear that he was friends with Maltiv. The atmosphere grew heated, but at that moment, the beginning of the joint class was announced, and everyone began to form groups. Each team was supposed to consist of 2 students from the academy and 1 knight. The Gerishel brothers, of course, immediately allied themselves with Maltiv. In turn, Ruins invited Hans to form an alliance with him. Jason soon joined them, and their team was fully assembled. Ruins declared that their goal was not just to score points, but to deal with the arrogant Trinity. Before starting the training, he was speaking with Hans in a corridor of the academy. All at once, they saw Maltiv standing before them. Ruins decided to use his player's eye to assess his potential. He also checked Hans's level. He was surprised to see that he was still a knight of the 3rd grade, even though his sword had previously emitted a blue aura. Ruins suggested to him that he try to defeat Maltiv, as he was clearly underestimating his enemy. Maltiv himself overheard their conversation, and the mere thought of fighting a commoner sent him into a rage. The young man ordered Hans to approach, but he refused, which angered the knight even more. Unable to restrain his fury, he grabbed his sword, intending to attack. He was stopped, however, by a swift blow from Sir Gulter. The mentor strictly reprimanded him, stating that drawing a weapon within the academy walls was a serious violation. For this misconduct, Maltiv was immediately removed from the knightly representative office. Maltiv, in a panic, began to threaten that his father would be enraged by such a decision, but Gulter only grinned. He assured him that his parents' anger would be much stronger when he learned that his son had shown cowardice and disobeyed the disciplinary charter. Ruins noticed how quickly the young noble's arrogance was replaced by fear at the mere mention of his father. In any case, the first stage of the joint class was close combat training. While some worked diligently, Chakil and Maltiv watched from the sidelines, deciding they did not need to waste their strength on a warm-up. Chakil disliked training in public in general, so as not to reveal his true power ahead of time. In contrast, Ruins' team was giving their all. Hans was nearly exhausted, but Ruins considered this to be only a light workout. During a break, Gulter approached him with a proposal. He had been carefully observing Ruins and had noticed how much stronger he had become, noting that such development could only be possible if an outstanding master had coached him. At first, everyone took it as a joke, but Gulter was extremely serious. He wanted to demonstrate to those present that no one at the academy could compare with Ruins in the art of swordplay, and it would give Ruins a chance to show up his tormentors. When the battle began, the audience was struck by the rapid rate of their exchanged blows. Any other opponent would have already been on the ground, but Ruins remained confident. Gulter carefully watched his every movement and then admitted with surprise that he had not expected to see such a high level of skill. He directly asked who had trained him. After a moment of thought, Ruins replied that his mentor was Sir Boldvar Peyton. This revelation caused a genuine shock among the audience. Everyone had been certain that this knight had been dead for a long time. When he was asked how he had met the legendary warrior, The young man calmly replied that he had known him since childhood. Maltiv, however, immediately accused him of lying. His reaction was quite expected, as his own father was considered the strongest knight in the kingdom. If it became known that Boldvar was alive, the official ratings would have to be changed. Ruin simply shrugged, stating that his mentor was completely uninterested in anyone's regalia or titles. He could consider whomever he wished to be the strongest, but that would not change the fact that Boldvar was alive. Maltiv could not endure the thought that someone might underestimate his father and immediately challenged Ruins to a duel. Before he could take even a single step, however, Gulter intervened and asked if he was truly unable to control himself. As a result, he announced that the first match in the group tests would be a battle between Ruin's team and Maltiv's team. There were no objections to this decision. The next day, everyone was eagerly awaiting the battle. Chakil, grinning, asked if Ruins was prepared for the upcoming fight. As soon as the battle began, Ruins instantly dodged a blow, displaying an incredible speed that shocked the audience. He activated his player's eye and directed it at Chakil, and what he saw surprised him. The representative of the Gerishel family possessed 6 hidden artifacts. The night before, the fathers of Chakil and Maltiv had met to discuss their son's successes and their invitation to the Ignite Academy. The conversation quickly turned to Ruin Ardell, whose name was now echoing throughout the entire kingdom. They considered him an upstart from the provinces who did not deserve such a rapid rise to prominence. They were especially concerned that Ruins could lure the princes to his side, which would in turn strengthen his own influence. Since their sons had found themselves on the same team, they decided to help them eliminate their competitor, and Chakil's father offered to transfer artifacts to the boys. At this point, Hungarian Maltiv's father hesitated, but Gerishel convinced him that Ruins must be eliminated as a threat. He himself had already supplied Chakil with valuable artifacts, and now it was his ally's turn. When the name of Boldvar Payton was mentioned in the conversation, it threw Hungarian into confusion. He could not believe that the knight was still alive. But if it was true, then Ruins' power was explained by his training. Both men came to the conclusion that if they did not destroy the boy now, he would become a direct threat to their positions. They finally sealed their deal, and they handed the magical items over to their sons. In the battle, Chakil almost defeated Ruins, paralyzing his movements. It was left to Maltiv to finish the young man off. He struck a powerful blow but missed his target. Ruins noticed that the enemy's wooden practice sword felt as if it were made of steel. The young man quickly guessed that this was the work of an amulet of resistance hanging around his opponent's neck. Since he himself possessed the destroyer skill, he activated it and shattered Maltiv's weapon into pieces. Chakil could not believe what was happening. Then, Ruins activated his gloves, and a fiery ogre materialized behind him. With contempt in his voice, Ruins stated that even 6 artifacts had not helped them to achieve victory. It was simply shameful to use such power against younger students. He recalled how Mikkel had been at first, then Chakil, suggesting he could immediately summon the ogre. Chakil rushed at him for mentioning his father, but the boy easily threw him back. The rest of the students still could not take their eyes off the fiery apparition, and the head of the academy was at least as amazed as everyone else. Of course, Ruins had not wanted to reveal this power in front of everyone, but it was impossible to keep it hidden forever. Mikkel, upon seeing the spirit materialize behind Ruins, simply collapsed to the ground in shock. They were already preparing to declare a winner, but suddenly Hans intervened, stating that the duel was not yet over. Approaching Maltiv, who now lacked a sword, he offered him another one. This gesture only angered Maltiv even more. How could a commoner dare to issue a challenge to him? At that moment, a bright blue aura flashed around Hans's sword.